This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Monday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City to our worldwide audience. We're also streaming live on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. Tom Keene off again today, not to worry. David Gura, the professional broadcaster, David Gura, in studio with us. We got you for the next 3 hours, David. You're going nowhere else. But we got a lot of good stuff coming up today. Brooke May, Managing Director at Evans Wave Wealth, is going to kick it off here, give us her market call. Henrietta Treyz, Managing Partner at Veda Partners, going to get the latest on this election, the campaign winding down the last few days here, and kind of how this is going to play out. Jack Devine, founder of the Arkin Group, he ran the CIA back in the Cold War. He's got some really interesting thoughts as it relates to kind of what's happening in the Middle East. So we're going to go geopolitics, we're going to go earnings, we're going to go markets. We got a lot coming up over the next 3 hours. Let's kick it off with Lisa Mateo.
You've got it. We have futures on the rise, and this is at the start of a big earnings week. Big tech in focus. Reports from Google parent Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. Meanwhile, we have Ford. They will open their books after the close. So we have NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 127 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, 190 points. And S&P futures up 0.5% or 29 points. We head over to the two-year yield, 4.10%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.25%, and that's up 1 basis point. Oil falling. We have Brent crude down more than 5% after Israel's Iran strikes steers clear of oil and nuclear facilities. So like we said, Brent crude at $71 a barrel, WTI crude $67 a barrel. That's affecting oil companies. You have ExxonMobil, Occidental Petroleum, both down 2%. Even in Europe, you have BP and Shell. They're down 2%. Few companies making news. That's Boeing. It's launched a nearly $19 billion share sale. It's going to address its liquidity needs, but also avoid potential credit rating downgrade to junk. And McDonald's, yes, they say it's quarter pounders returning to the menus at restaurants this week without the onions.
Whoa.
After that ruling, with the E. coli outbreak, shares are up, though, 1%. So shares back on the rise again. Okay. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Colin and David.
Bring your own onions, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, bring your own onions. Right. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate it. David Gura, he's sitting in for Tom Keene again today. David, what are you looking at here in the market? We're 8 days to the election. I don't know. We got a busy earnings week coming up here. There's a lot for this market today.
Yeah, obviously a big week for Magnificent Seven. We've got 5 of those companies reporting this week, so paying attention to that. And then you mentioned the Boeing news at the top, offering 90 million shares, 5 billion of depository shares expected. We reported on this over the weekend, but another sign that this company is struggling to find the liquidity it needs and is still in many binds. I wouldn't say in a bind, but many.
Yeah,
many
although I think it's a pretty strong, move towards their employees. They're saying, hey, we got plenty of cash here. Yep. How about you at your local household? So you really want to see these two sides get together, get those planes back coming off the assembly line. So we'll have to see. So we'll have to see how this deal goes for Boeing. But big news there. They went big with their common stock and preferred stock offering. Let's check in with Brooke May. She's a managing partner at Evans May Wealth. Hey, Brooke, we're kind of getting into, it's a big earnings week. We had a big earnings week last week. What are you telling your clients here? What should they be focusing on? Should they be focusing on earnings? Should they be focusing on the Fed? What are you telling your clients these days?
All the above. When we look at earnings on the S&P, we think that they'll be up about 15% from this year to next year. And that takes us to around 57.75 on the S&P 500 if you apply a 21 times multiple. So we're trading around 100 points higher than that right now. And that's somewhat of a concern. In the near term, we could go to 6,000. But right now, with the 10-year Treasury up about 65 basis points from the first rate cut, we think it's not a bad idea to rotate into some fixed income. If we can get 4.5% or 5% on a high-quality corporate bond, why not? We think that's a good place to be right now with stretched equity prices.
I mentioned the Magnificent Seven there at the top, and these 5 companies reporting this week. NVIDIA is still far outperforming the rest of them. What are you going to be watching for, listening for on that conference call when NVIDIA reports, when these others report? And there's been so much talk for so many months now about the need for this market to broaden out. Are we seeing signs of that? Are you looking beyond the Magnificent Seven, or is there still some value there for you?
We are, and we are seeing a broadening. When we looked at earnings going into 2024, we thought tech earnings would be up around 28%, and really the other 493 names only up 7%. Going into 2025, we expect tech earnings to be up around 17% and the broad market to be around 13%. So we're seeing more participation in earnings. However, this week, we wouldn't be surprised if we see volatility. If this quarter's like last, big tech earnings were priced to perfection. These companies had to beat on earnings, they had to beat on revenue, and they had to give stellar guidance just to maintain the price that they were at. Any disappointment and the stocks were punished. So we wouldn't be surprised if this week creates some volatility, but we would consider that buying opportunities. We're in a bull market and we don't see a meaningful pullback in the near future.
So, Brooke, on the fixed income side, you mentioned here, I mean, a lot of folks like myself, I'd be sitting there, a 2-year treasury, I'm taking no risk. I think my government's going to pay me back in 24 months, and I'm getting paid 4.1%. Do I do that, or do I take some credit risk and try to be a little smarter than the David Guras of the world?
I think you want a little of both. The economy is strong. We don't see that changing in the near term. The labor market continues to hold up this economy. And so we think you can have a little both. We like our bond money being our safe money. However, right now we're in an environment where you can take a little risk to get a little bit more yield.
Going back to the, and I should make a surveillance correction. I said NVIDIA's reporting this week. I'm just in a fog because of this election. It's not until November. So surveillance correction there, if I may, here on the show. Brooke, I know your target for the S&P 500 is not 6,000. We've seen so many people revising them upward. You have not yet. Just walk us through your rationale there of keeping it a bit lower than that, as we've seen this kind of consensus move to a higher target.
Hitting that level wouldn't be a surprise just because that's the trajectory, but it's very tough to justify. We think that, right now, earnings are stretched. We're trading at almost 22 times forward earnings. And, if you break it down, big tech is trading around 28 times, the rest of the market trading at 18, 19 times, which is in line with the 5 and the 10-year average. However, we need to see that participation in earnings. So again, if we're looking at 15% earnings growth on the S&P 500 and apply a 21 times multiple, that gives us 57.75. And that's below where we're trading today.
Hey, Brooke, a lot of times, we see this S&P 500 up 22, 23% year to date. But a lot of stocks have not participated along that route. It hasn't been as broad as maybe I think a lot of market technicians would like to see. How about some of the small cap, mid cap stocks? Is it time for those, or is that just a fool's errand again?
Well, with yields ticking up, it's the bond market's telling us right now that the Fed's going to be slower to cut rates than we'd hoped, and we've heard that story now for about 2 years. We anticipate rate cuts, and the can is kicked down the road, and we don't think that this time is going to be any different. A few weeks ago, the market was pricing in quite a few cuts over the next year, and now we think we'll see a 25 basis point cut in November and December, but a pause in January wouldn't be a surprise. And as we know, these small cap companies are interest rate sensitive. 30% of their debt is floating rate compared to only about 6% of debt within the S&P 500 being floating rate. So that cuts into their earnings. And every time we see, a lower expectation for rate cuts, small caps tend to sell off. So we do think you can make some money there. However, we think that you'll do better in large caps, specifically big tech.
I'm very curious how you're watching the Fed's rate cut cycle unfold and looking to history as any kind of guide there. The Fed so emphatic that it's data dependent, meeting by meeting decision making. What does the past tell you? How does history sort of inform your thinking about A, what the Fed is going to do, and B, what the market effects of that might be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we look at, CPI, for example, we're seeing certain components within CPI really level off. Food is only up about 2% year over year. However, shelter continues to be an issue, and shelter makes up about 30% of CPI. And we don't see that changing. We think that we've got a demographic issue on our hand. By some studies, there are 7 million too few homes in the country for demographics. and that's single family and multifamily. And we're bringing on additional units, but really it's only enough to keep up with inflation. So we think certain components within CPI are going to stay elevated, and that's going to give the Fed some pause or some hesitation. So we think they're going to continue on this rate cutting path, but we might only see 4 or 5 rate cuts over the next 12 to 18 months.
Brooke, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting some of your time here this morning. Brooke May, she's a managing partner at Evans May Wealth, and she's a graduate of Indiana University, which begs the question, what is a Hoosier?
What is a Hoosier?
And I think the only answer I've ever gotten is it's somebody from Indiana.
There you go.
So there you go. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, and Lisa. A final week of campaigning in the race for the White House following Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden last night. The former president once again claiming that he can end wars overseas.
Kamala Harris is a train wreck who has destroyed everything in her path. To make her president would be a gamble with the lives of millions and millions of people. She would get us into World War III. We're very close to World War III.
Awkward moments at the Trump campaign rally Sunday. Some in the audience groaning when comedian Tony Hinchcliffe opened up the rally, telling jokes about Latino and black voters.
There's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
The Trump campaign is distancing itself from Hinchcliffe, saying that the joke does not reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris made a pitch to the people of Puerto Rico to give her their vote in an announcement made on the social media platform X Sunday. Harris pledged a new opportunity task force for Puerto Rico. She wants to combine the federal government with the private sector and nonprofits to take on one of the most difficult challenges the island has faced, rebuilding and modernizing the energy grid.
Puerto Rico is home to some of the most talented, innovative, and ambitious people in our nation. And Puerto Ricans deserve a president who sees and invests in that strength.
Harris also slammed former President Trump for how he handled Hurricane Maria in 2017. Egypt's president says his country has proposed a 2-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, during which 4 hostages held in Gaza would be freed. There is no immediate response from Israel or Hamas. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
Hi, Michael Barr, the business of sports. If you're a Jets fan, is it over, Michael Barr? Is it over?
In those final few minutes of that game.
Oh, man. I'm sorry to slam the Patriots, but it's like if you let the Patriots score on you with about 25 seconds left, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So I
couldn't figure out what happened. I went to get a beverage of my choice, came back, and I was unclear what had happened so quickly in that game at the end.
And the Aaron Rodgers era, I don't know. I mean, is it over?
Boy, I'd like to see what happens at the end of this season.
Well, and they're playing Thursday night. They come back and play Thursday night, so we'll see how that plays out. We got the Giants tonight. That should be lovely. So, New York football, there you go.
How about that? Detroit football.
Exactly. You got that. Oh, we've got the World Series tonight coming back to Yankee Stadium. The Dodgers come into the Bronx, so we'll check that out. Hopefully we can get a 3 wins in the Bronx there for the Yankees, so we'll pay attention to that. So a lot going on in the world of sports, as it happens every time this year. You got football, basketball, baseball, like everything. Everybody's playing in October. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by BNY. BNY expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit BNY.com. All right, we have futures showing signs of a rebound on Wall Street after the S&P 500 clocked its first weekly decline in 7. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 136 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, 192 points. S&P futures up 0.5% or 31 points. To currencies, we have the dollar weaker. Japanese yen down 0.2%. The yen actually weakened to a 3-month low after Japan's ruling coalition failed to win a majority in parliament, right now at 152.64 against the dollar. We have the euro, British pound stronger. Bitcoin up more than 1% at around 68,000. Few companies making news. That would be Apple. It's expected to reveal more information about its Mac computer lineup this week that will include M4 processors. And then you have that software update also expected that could bring Apple Intelligence to the latest iPhone. We're not done yet. Apple also making news for being blocked from selling its iPhone 16 in Indonesia because it just hasn't invested enough in the country. And in other news, you have trade tracking data showing that Russia receiving top-end Dell servers containing AI chips made by NVIDIA or AMD from an Indian pharma company. And finally, the information reporting Google plans to preview AI technology that takes over a web browser to complete tasks like research and also shopping. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene this morning. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. Looking at WTI crude oil off 5.8%, down to $67.60 per barrel. Big de-risking there after the retaliation or the response by Israel to Iran was probably a little bit more muted than maybe expected by the markets. So we'll see what that means for global energy going forward. Julian Lee joins us. He's an oil strategist for Bloomberg News. Julian, does this pullback in global crude, does that make sense to you? Does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a clear sign of just how much oil prices were being supported by fears around an escalation in the Middle East. An Israeli attack against Iranian oil infrastructure was always a worry, even if it wasn't necessarily the most obvious choice of targets. I think the market had got spooked by it, and that really was keeping prices where they were. What we're seeing now, I think, is really a focus back on the fundamentals of supply and demand and the outlook for weaker demand growth, particularly in China, now and in the coming months, and the likelihood, as many see it, of a supply surplus in the early part of next year.
Julian, count me among those who rely on your analysis, but also enjoy your kind of summation of what other analysts are saying about the oil market. And I wonder what you're reading this morning on the heels of that retaliatory attack by Israel. What are other analysts saying about the prospects for oil?
Well, we've seen Citigroup has just cut their oil price forecasts on the back of this. I think we are seeing generally the views that this is a correction that reflects a growing belief that Israel has now made its response. It was sufficiently measured that both Israel and Iran can perhaps draw a line under their immediate bilateral attacks, and that maybe for the time being, those at least are put to one side. And you know, nobody's ever going to suggest that an outbreak of peace and harmony between Israel and Iran, but at least for the moment, the immediate concerns, I think, are very much lessened. And people are starting to look at the balances going forward, these worries about Chinese demand growth, some possible concerns about Indian oil demand growth as well. And on the supply side, looking at rising production in the US, in Brazil, where a bunch of new production platforms are due to be installed by the end of the year. Another production facility at Guyana due on next year. And sort of lurking in the background, there is this decision by 8 of the OPEC Plus members to slowly begin putting oil back into the market in December, and in addition, a modest increase in the amount that the United Arab Emirates is allowed to start pumping starting in January next year. And all of those, I think, are now starting to come much more to the fore in analysts' minds.
So, Julian, that's kind of where I wanted to go, which is kind of OPEC Plus. What is the role they play in kind of managing the price and supply and demand, or supply of global oil? Is it less today than it was 20 years ago, just simply because maybe, I don't know, the U.S. is now a net exporter? What is the role of OPEC Plus these days?
I think OPEC Plus is still very much the sort of swing producer. They are really the only group of countries that, outside of times of sort of extreme dislocation, as we had during the COVID crisis, they are the only group of producers that attempts to try and balance supply and demand. I think their job has become much more difficult, in part because of the growth of U.S. production, and as you say, the transition of the U.S. from a big net importer to a net exporter. But also, I think one of the problems they have is that there are two very differing views of the strength of the market out there. One is the view held by organizations like the International Energy Agency, and it appears by most of the banks and the traders, that the market is on the verge of being oversupplied, that there's too much oil around, and a different view that is being put forward by OPEC's own analysts and has been all year, that demand growth is strong. Incremental demand is running at somewhere close to 2 million barrels a day. More oil is needed. And the trouble is you've got those two very different views, and the oil ministers are somehow caught in the middle of that. And they, I think, bought into their own analysts' view earlier in the year and started looking at putting back oil into the market. And it's now turning out, perhaps, that the rest of the players don't think there's room for that. And prices are softening as a result.
Julian, let me ask you lastly just about Chinese demand, and something that Paul and I and Tom have been talking about over the last month or so are these stimulus measures by the Chinese government, fiscal and monetary stimulus measures. What's your sense of the effect that that's having or isn't having on China's demand for oil? I know that it's been something that's been largely in focus for a while now.
Yeah, it has. And I think there was hope among the oil bulls that Chinese stimulus measures would help to boost demand. That really doesn't seem to be happening. I think the announcements that we've had so far have largely disappointed. And I think there's a view that going forwards, China has really embraced alternative fuels in a way that most other consumers haven't. I mean, the rollout of electric vehicles, the building of solar and wind power generation has been huge. And I think that there is a feeling that even if you get stimulus, it's going to go into, as far as it sort of plays into energy, it's very likely that the biggest impact is going to be felt in the new generation of energy providers and not so much in oil.
Julian, thanks so much for joining us. As always, appreciate getting a few minutes of your time. Julian Lee, he's an oil strategist for Bloomberg News. He's over there in London with the interesting little facial hair situation, which is a signature of Julian Lee, I think, with a little Fu Manchu kind of thing.
Very true.
So how big is Halloween in the Gura household?
It's a big deal. We had the first parties, and I used the plural this weekend. So, each kid's class has a party, and decorations are out, as we talked about last week. And then I was struck talking to some parents how early trick-or-treating starts. Some expecting 3:30 in the afternoon on Thursday. I haven't taken the day off, but, it's easy in Brooklyn to cover a lot of ground.
I was going to say,
the kids are excited about that.
You can go just like down your block and get a
kids want to have pillowcases, they told me. They want to maximize how much they can pack in.
All right. Halloween in Brooklyn. How good is that? S&P futures up 29, Dow up 179, NASDAQ up 130. That's 0.6 basis point. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. NASDAQ futures leading the charge. Jam-packed week of tech earnings from Google parent Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. Now, this week's U.S. economic agenda also packed with major government reports, including jobs data on Friday, GDP on Wednesday. Let's get to NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 126 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, 168 points. We have S&P futures up 0.4%, 27 points. The two-year yield, 4.11%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.26%, and that's up 1 basis point. Few companies making news. That's Volkswagen. Workers in Germany will stop production today. Protest plans to close factories. Now, its labor chief says VW looking to close at least 3 German plants and push for a 10% salary cut to reduce costs. Shares are down about 0.5% in Germany. And Porsche shares dropped after reporting earnings that fell short of analyst expectations. They're down about 3% in Germany. And shares of Dutch medical technology firm Royal Philips fell the most in 26 years. It slashed its sales growth forecast for the year due to slowing demand in China. It's now down 17% in Amsterdam. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, so check out youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast. David, what's your election coverage scenario for you? Where are you going?
Tomorrow I go to Wisconsin. I'm going to be there kind of tagging along as Tammy Baldwin, the incumbent senator, campaigns. Then I'm going to interview her on Wednesday, come back. And then next weekend I'm going to go to Pennsylvania for an indefinite amount of time. I think, I have a soft book to train back on Wednesday night, but I think everyone's expectation is things won't be tied up by then. And
is that right?
We'll get unofficial tallies that night, and most counties I've been in touch with have said they're confident they'll be updating their dashboards and the like, but I think it'll be...
Where in Pennsylvania will you be?
I'll be in and around Philadelphia at first, and we'll see how far afield I go, but there's enough interesting there, I think, and just given how so many of those counties are really split 50-50,
yep.
I think there'll be a lot of interesting people to talk to there.
All right, very good. You're going to earn your stripes there, that's for sure. Henrietta Treyz joins us. She's a managing partner at Veda Partners. She's the one that really gives us a sense of kind of what's happening on this election and on the political side and how it might affect markets here. Henrietta, as David was just mentioning, he's going to be out there in the field trying to get a sense of how this is going to play out over the next week or so. What is your sense between now and Election Day, Henrietta? Is there anything that might move the needle one way or the other, or are we pretty much where we are?
We're seeing a lot of really robust turnout from Republicans in rural areas right now. That's the main theme of the last week of early voting. So in states like Nevada, I'm confident saying, this is a very bad position for Democrats to be in the state of Nevada, which is a critical swing state. But it's not necessarily translating elsewhere yet. That's because different states have different voting patterns and in-person early regulations, like the state of Pennsylvania, for example. So there's a lot of shift, but this week is really an integral one to watch. You want to watch the suburban vote and the youth vote. Those demographics disproportionately start voting this week. Before, it had been principally an older white rural voter, and a lot of that is Republicans cannibalizing their election day vote from 2020. So this week should give us some new information to see whether it's going to be a scenario where Democrats continue to stay home, as they did during the first week of early voting, or if they're going to start coming out, which would be disproportionately, again, your urban, suburban, and younger voters, which is a demographic that this cycle is skewing Democratic, particularly on the suburban side, which I think is where we should really be focused.
Henrietta, help me understand the metamorphosis of the Republicans as it comes to the early vote, because it was something that during the last presidential election, the one before that, Donald Trump was not an enthusiast for. He was not encouraging his supporters to vote early. What has changed, and sort of how does it or how could it affect what we see after Election Day in terms of the way in which Republicans in particular look at these votes as they're tallied?
Yeah, and it really does need to change. Otherwise, Democrats are going to get wiped out across the swing states. So right now, what we're seeing is a material shift from 2020 in terms of early voting. And this is a result, the metamorphosis comes from millions of dollars in Republican Party operation explanations or sort of explainers to voters that you should vote early in person. So Republicans are disproportionately voting early in person, whereas Democrats have an advantage in the mail-in ballot. So to get really granular for you, the voters out in Nevada who are able to vote early in person are doing so in rural areas. But then you have Clark County, where there's the disproportionate share of Democrats and 90% of the electorate. And they mostly vote via mail-in ballot that now all Nevadans get. So there's a lot of granular changes that have happened since 2020. But the rule of thumb is that Republicans now are voting in person early, where Democrats are favoring mail-in balloting early. And as I mentioned, this week is when a lot of the youth vote will go and vote in person early. But there is an indication that we'll have less of a blue wall going into Election Day, but also less of a red wave on Election Day, again, because they're voting early at about double the rate Democrats are. So it is going through quite a bit of a shift and creating a lot of problems for people like me who are obviously trying to track against a very difficult comp year in 2020, which was a pandemic anyway.
Key for get out the vote. Is any party, any particular more advantage or less advantage in getting out the vote?
When it comes to ground game, I think it's clear that the Democrats have a better ground game, something like 326 field offices nationwide, where the Trump campaign famously does not disclose its numbers. I think the Trump camp has farmed out a lot of its get out the vote to third party campaigns. The penultimate example would be Elon Musk, auctioning off $1 million to voters who register. That's an example of a third party campaign, sort of in-kind donation, whereas Democrats are doing that within the campaign structure. So in terms of field offices, I want to say they have like 12 just in the state of Florida, for example, and then tens of thousands of volunteers that have signed on since Kamala Harris joined the race. So that's the difference in the field operation. But the Democrats' job is harder now because more Republicans have voted early. And you want to bank those votes, not because they're any more or less important, but you don't want to have to worry about more people on Election Day in terms of getting people out to vote.
You bring up Elon Musk. He was in New York City yesterday for this 6-hour-long rally that Donald Trump put on at Madison Square Garden, and he talked about what he might be able to cut if Donald Trump were to win, and he were named to this new position, which I checked the name of here. This is the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, another crypto allusion there from Elon Musk. Curious what you heard from that rally so much as you listened to it, and I just think back on the conversation that we had with you last week or the week before just about this rally. It was kind of couched as maybe a bit of a vanity project for Donald Trump coming back to New York, which is where he'd lived and had kind of spurned him in recent years. Now we're really seeing what could be kind of damaging legacy from some of the comments that were made there at that event. Should he be worried about how they're reverberating, how those clips are kind of spreading across this country?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a New Yorker myself. You do not come for Puerto Rico. That's not something that I would advise. And you're seeing members from the senators to the House members, including even the Trump campaign, try to distance themselves from the comedian who called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. I mean, that's just not workable. 600,000 Puerto Ricans in the state of Pennsylvania, where you're going to go right outside of Philly. That's a problem. And you can't really have that Bad Bunny then coming out and endorsing, J-Lo coming out and endorsing. I mean, this is New York pride in its fullest. And you have the fate of the House of Representatives riding on some swing seats in the House in New York City and in New York State and the surrounding regions. So that right there is the problem. But you mentioned Elon Musk. And I think that his understanding of what can be cleaned up is sort of a canard. Members always say, we can trim fraud, waste, and abuse. That's been since I ever got to DC, it's roughly $300 billion. And I believe last night Elon Musk said that it was $2 trillion. So you're not even playing the same sport at this point. Now, there is not $2 trillion to cut. That's the entire budget of the entire federal government for the entire year. So it's just not real numbers that he is referencing. And DOGE would be responsible, if you want to call it that, for cutting.
If we have to, yeah.
It's not you're not playing with real numbers.
Henrietta, what's the call here? What's the feeling? What's the consensus about some of the down ballot voting here at this stage?
My expectation is that Republicans are going to win the United States Senate. I bet at 90% odds of that for the entire year. And I feel very comfortable with that. Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania are all very disconcerting races for Democrats right now. You're going to go interview Tammy Baldwin. I know she's concerned up there as well. They're really fighting for all the turnout. In general, if you want like a whole lay of the land, state of the race, Nevada looks very bad for Democrats. Republicans are outperforming. You got the urban voters who are rural voters who are coming out in droves in terms of the get out the vote campaign. Arizona has less read through, but also looks very promising for Republicans right now. And in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina, it also looks pretty good for Republicans right now. So Democrats have to crush this next week of early voting in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and then see how Souls to the Polls did in Georgia yesterday. I haven't had a chance to look at that data, but you want to see what the voter turnout is in suburban areas in all of those states. But Democrats have an incumbency problem of getting all those voters out now that Republicans can be a little bit restful about, because they've turned out so many members in droves over the last couple weeks of early voting, and it's disproportionately looking very good for them in states like Nevada.
Henrietta, thanks so much for the latest there. Henrietta Treyz, managing partner at Veda Partners. She is all over this election news and analysis from the presidential election all the way down to the local races in the House and Senate. We appreciate getting some of her time with our news in New York City. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. Donald Trump held a nearly 6-hour rally at New York's Madison Square Garden. It featured criticisms of Vice President Kamala Harris over crime, the economy, and the border.
The day I take the oath of office, the migrant invasion of our country ends and the restoration of our country begins.
One of Trump's warm-up acts bashed Puerto Rico. Vice President Kamala Harris made a pitch to the people of Puerto Rico to give her their vote.
He abandoned the island, tried to block aid after back-to-back devastating hurricanes, and offered nothing more than paper towels and insults.
Harris made her comments on X. NATO confirms North Korean troops are being sent to Russia to fight Ukraine. Some have already been deployed. Sentencing in Washington, D.C. today for a Hollywood actor who pleaded guilty to being part of the January 6th breach of the U.S. Capitol. Jay Johnston pleaded guilty to a felony count of civil disorder back in July. There are now nearly 1,500 January 6th defendants. Johnston is arguably the most famous, having appeared in Bob's Burgers and Arrested Development. Prosecutors will ask for 18 months in prison for Johnston, saying he was part of that mob that day. Johnston will seek leniency. His defense lawyer says he lost work over this. Finally, YouTuber Mr. Beast tops Forbes' top creators list for the third year in a row. And if Old Man Barr knew who Mr. Beast was, he'd be more hip. Forbes assisting managing editor Steve Bertoni says more money flows to the creator economy every year.
This year, the 50 people on the Forbes top creator list made more than $720 million. That's an average of $14 million a person. Obviously, it skews high at the top end.
This is the third year Forbes has put out a top creators list. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
Yeah, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. I wonder how quickly this Boeing deal is going to get done. I mean, 90 million shares plus $5 billion preferred deal. I think they can probably fly by it and do it today, maybe. I don't know if they need
that fast, you think?
I think so. Maybe, maybe to get a price it after the close or something here. But it'd be interesting to see. But this is a significant capital raise.
Looks like would be the largest share sales since SoftBank Group sold part of its stake in T-Mobile in 2020. Yep. Really sizable, and came in here. You were saying it stood out to you.
Yeah, it does, and it's interesting. It's a stock that's kind of settled down. It's down 40% year to date. It's been trading here a lot for a long time. So we've had a lot of stock trade at this price over the last month or so. I think everybody's got a feel for where the valuation is here today, and I think you could probably take a look at this. And if you think there's value there, you can jump in. If you like the yield on the preferred, you can jump in there and get a little bit of equity kicker there. I don't know. I think I could sell this thing.
It's got to settle that labor issue. That's
exactly.
the last remaining
piece of this. That labor issue, and then they got to get planes coming off the assembly line so the cash flow can come in. So they're talking about negative free cash flow first half of next year. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures on the rise with NASDAQ futures leading the gains right now, up 0.6%, 128 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 134 points. S&P futures up 0.4%, or 27 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.11%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.25%. That's up 1 basis point. To commodities, have to point out oil, Brent crude down more than 5% at $71 a barrel. WTI crude at $67 a barrel. And we have spot gold lower at $2,731 an ounce. Few companies making news. Eli Lilly, they expect to sell its popular weight loss drug Mounjaro in Hong Kong as early as next year. Now that would be the first of its kind to be available in the China region. Shares right now up about 0.5%. Delta Airlines, well, they've sued CrowdStrike over the global tech outage in July. You remember it grounded thousands of flights. And you can add Robinhood to the list of retail brokerages allowing traders to bet on election outcomes before next week's U.S. vote for president. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. And we're also streaming live on YouTube, so head over there and check out Bloomberg Podcast. Are you dialed in at all, David, to the World Series?
Yes, we've been watching it, and I suspect
you're a
I'll be up
Carolina
late
guy.
tonight.
Do you have any affinity here?
Not really. It's funny. My sons asked me this because they never lived there, but North Carolina, you can kind of. A lot of folks went for the Braves because it was kind of the closest city and the closest major league team. But we had a good minor league team in Durham, had the Bulls there, and it was cheap and easy to go to. So when college basketball season wasn't on, there was some baseball to watch
Durham
in the
Bulls,
summer, especially
the greatest show on dirt.
Yes, there you go.
From the DAP, Durham Athletic Park.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
All right, folks, your daily look at the front pages around the world is brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors, switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges and no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RA. Lisa Mateo, wealthy Americans are paying millions to live in luxury retirement communities.
Yeah, have you thought about are you going to stay in the Jersey compound forever?
Yes. That's the plan. Staying there forever.
No chance he does it.
That's the plan, not leaving the Jersey Shore. Well, a lot of wealthy Americans, they're paying a lot of money to go to these retirement communities that are now luxury retirement communities. They're called life plan communities.
Oh boy.
The reason they're called that is because you start in an apartment and then you can move to nursing-like care.
Or be moved, I suppose.
Or be moved, yes, to that section. So you have one place to go because they're finding that a lot of people find it difficult to find homes for their parents once they reach that level where they have to go to nursing home status. So they're saying if you start now, then they already have that in to get there.
And
but
there's one in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right? Is that kind of what we're talking about? In Jersey, there's one where Lisa and I live. There's one that they put up like 3 or 4 towers, right?
Yeah,
wow.
It's a lot. It's a whole community. But this is like way over. I mean, you want to hear the prices for these?
Go.
Okay, so they have pools, beautiful grounds, fancy meals. An upfront payment can range from just over $1 million for one bedroom, to more than $7 million for a 3-bedroom.
Wow.
What? And then you have the monthly fees, for the amenities, $13,800 for housekeeping, valet. Yeah, so this is
another level.
like another level. This is Silicon Valley. This is the V at Palo Alto, okay? So that's what they're talking about. But, I mean, there are other places, yes, that do have these. They're not as expensive. But like I said, the baby boomers saw what their parents went through, and they don't want their kids to go through the same trouble. So that's why this is becoming popular.
Not to harp on North Carolina too much, but I mean, there are a ton of these around Duke and UNC. And a lot of people moving to the area just for them. And then you have, they draw from the universities, have all of this cultural stuff.
I mean, we did consider thinking about, the kind of retirement years. We were thinking like the greater Duke community, but it's just too far from the ocean. It's too far from the ocean. So we said Jersey Shore. All right, very good.
Did you know there was a big celebration over the weekend for the New York City subway? 120 years old.
Wow.
Yes, it happened yesterday. Wow. A big part. The first subway train left from City Hall to 145th Street in Harlem, October 27th, 1904. Wow. It made it uptown in 26 minutes. There you go. At the time,
faster than today, I think, actually.
I was going to ask, how is that compared to today?
I ride the city subway every single day, which I've done since I don't know, 1986. It's by far the most efficient way to get around town.
Yes, that is true.
Yes.
But I don't know why people do anything different. I mean, and I'll make the claim here today. From today versus my first day in 1986, the subway experience, no change. With one big exception. With one big exception, air-conditioned cars.
Oh, yeah.
Back in 1986, only about half the cars were air-conditioned.
Yeah.
Now they're all air-conditioned. The same grubby people, the same, everything you want to say that you don't like about the subway today is the same as it was 1986. Nothing's
Status
changed.
quo.
So people say it's gotten so much worse. I'm like, no, it hasn't. You haven't ridden the subway.
Well, there were grand plans to kind of modernize a lot of these stations and make things better with the money from congestion pricing, which is on hold, of course. That's the governor. So we'll see if that changes. But, there's room for improvement, I would say.
Yeah, always. But, I mean, it gets how many gajillion people around this island every day?
Back to the norm that we had pre-pandemic, I think.
Yeah, but I think, what are we now? We're not are we back at pre-pandemic?
I think we're very close to it,
Okay.
because there was that kind of trough for a while, and things were strange.
Right.
Stranger on the subway, I think.
But I don't know how you get around the city. I mean, you're riding your bike? Are you doing it?
Vespa.
Uber?
Get that
Yeah.
Vespa.
Vespa.
You haven't done that yet.
No, exactly right. All right, what else you got?
Okay, so New York, this is in the New York Post. Okay, so New York reportedly banned the sale of caffeine-infused cannabis. Now, caffeine-infused cannabis?
It seems to counteract one another.
Cannabis-infused caffeine?
I know. So state regulators apparently banned it. They're cannabis pills also infused with caffeine. Apparently, it's popular with fitness enthusiasts, office professionals.
You're the only fitness enthusiast.
And I'm not popping these. I don't get it.
What do you do for your energy? You're just water, or
it's just me.
It's just you. It's just Lisa Mateo.
She rides the surveillance wave.
Yes.
But apparently this is the thing. It's called Go and Genius. They're marketed as energy stimulants. But the company is appealing this ruling, so we'll see what happens. But it's been sold in New York since February of last year. But it's a big thing.
So is it different than Red Bull and stuff like that?
I guess so, because it has
Cannabis.
THC.
Because it's THC.
Yeah,
all right.
so...
The weedage, okay.
Yeah, the weedage, yes.
Do you have a lot of dispensaries in New Jersey? I mean,
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess there's like 200-something in New York State, but I've noticed in Brooklyn there were a lot of these shops that have now been closed down by the sheriff.
Well,
we have
yeah.
a sheriff, apparently.
Well, yeah. I mean, it used to be in Midtown Manhattan, just within like a 3-square block of Penn Station. There were a gajillion of these things. Now they're all shut.
Yeah.
Within like a day. The city said no more. So, but yeah, in Jersey,
figure it out.
Yeah, we go to Neptune. That's our place to go. And I'll tell you, you go to this dispensary in New Jersey, it is every walk of life, from the wealthiest retiree to the kid off the street to every color, shape, form.
Yeah.
It is the great equalizer. Go into the dispensary, and it's they do a great business.
That's America.
That's
In
America.
Neptune.
That's America. Very good on this election year. All right, we got the World Series.
Finally, yes, World Series. Okay, so the New York Times has this interesting look when Yankees general manager Brian Cashman loved the Dodgers. I didn't realize this.
I didn't know that.
But yeah, so he told the New York Times he grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. His parents were from New York. Most of the family supported the Yankees, but he says he was the standout, the outcast. He was the Dodgers fan. And he says he doesn't really know why he was. Maybe it was because they were a great team in the 70s when he was growing up. But he just says he was a bat boy at the Dodgers for their spring training. So he was really involved with them. But, then he started working for the Yankees and things changed. So
Rich Truman's favorite general manager.
Is that right?
Really?
Oh yeah, loves
Cashman.
And
Interesting.
Coach Franklin at Penn State, Rich Truman's favorite college.
There we go.
Coach.
I'm learning so much here.
Exactly.
See? But I didn't know this. So he started at a college intern with the Yankees in '86. He worked his way up, assistant general manager, then general manager for the past, 27 years?
The intrigue, this article was great, but the intrigue that I loved is that Frank McCourt tried to hire him to the Dodgers from the Yankees.
Yes.
For less money.
For less money in 2005.
Or maybe more money. Maybe it was more money, but he stayed at the Yankees for less money. So I think at that point he felt like he had some Steinbrenner loyalty.
I mean, the Yankees
go back.
Yeah, the Yankees are down 2-0. They're coming back to the Bronx tonight for 3 games, I believe.
We'll see. Judge better show up.
Yeah, next 3 in New York. Thanks, Ari. And then we'll see what happens. See if they can kind of right this ship here. But after the football weekend we had with the Jets, the New York sports market needs some positive news coming out.
And Ohtani is playing, right? Can I get an update on that?
Yeah,
yes, he is. The shoulder is fine.
Yeah.
Workable. Okay, good.
Exactly right. So, all right, Lisa Mateo with the newspapers. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Always one of the highest rated parts of this program.
The
S&P
highest
500 up 26 points. The Dow up 130 points. NASDAQ up 127 points. That's 0.6%. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, good morning, folks. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and check us out there. Coming up this hour, Hugh Johnson, chairman at Hugh Johnson Economics, to get his thoughts about the upcoming election, what it means for economic policy. Jack Devine, founder of the Arkin Group, on Israel's response to Iran and whether it could lessen tensions in the Middle East. Jen Lawless, professor at University of Virginia, get her thoughts on this election coming up. Then Matt Winkler, the founder of Bloomberg News, he's Bloomberg News editor-in-chief emeritus, on his Bloomberg opinion piece on inflation. Bloomberg Surveillance today is brought to you by CohnReznick Advisory, Assurance, Tax. Is your business future ready? Talk to CohnReznick's digital advisory team about strategies and platforms to drive competitive advantage. Let's get a check on these markets at Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
You've got it. We have futures on the rise at the start of a big earnings week. We've got big tech in focus with reports from Google parent Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. Meanwhile, Ford, they'll open their books after the close. I would head over to NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, 118 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 111 points. S&P futures up 0.4%, 24 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.11%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.26%. That's up 2 basis points. To commodities, oil falling. Israel's Iran strike steers clear of oil and nuclear facilities. We have Brent crude down more than 5% at $71 a barrel. WTI crude down 6% at $67 a barrel. That's affecting oil companies too. So checking with ExxonMobil, Occidental Petroleum, they're both down 2%. Even in Europe, you have BP and Shell, both down 2%. Few companies making news. That's Boeing. It's launched nearly $19 billion share sale to address its liquidity needs and also avoid a potential credit rating downgrade to junk. And then you have McDonald's. Yes, fans, the Quarter Pounder is returning to menus at all its restaurants without the onions. Hold the onions, or they were tied to an E. coli outbreak. Those shares, they were up 1%. Now they're back down about 2%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene here this morning. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. 8 days to the election. I guess here from the perspective of Bloomberg, a lot of the discussion is, what the economic policies of either candidate might mean for this domestic economy and the global economy. We pose that to Hugh Johnson, Chairman, Hugh Johnson Economics. Hugh, thanks so much for joining us here. What are you telling your clients here 8 days out to the election about what is an election? It's probably too close to call here, but how should they be thinking about it? What are you telling your clients?
Well, it's really complex and obviously very difficult to talk about because it's very difficult to understand. Really what it comes down to, first of all, people should start thinking about what's going to happen after the election, regardless of who gets elected. Now, I know the projection polls are suggesting that maybe Trump has a slight edge. So part of what we're talking about is what we might see if Trump is elected. But quite frankly, it's not going to be much different. It's a close call on the election. We all kind of know that. We can't predict who's going to win. So you got to think about both. When it comes to economic policy, and it's going to be very important in my judgment when we get into the next administration, it really comes down to taxes and trade policy or tariffs. And when it comes to taxes, the number one focus of, I think, both, and I think of all of us, should be on really tax policy. And really what we're talking about is trying to get an extension of the 2017 tax reductions in the marginal rate, increase in standard deductions, higher exemptions for gift taxes as well as estate taxes, but basically trying to get an extension of the 2017 tax reductions, which sunset or expire at the end of 2025. And what we've learned when in 2018 and 19, when we had the initial passage of those 2017 reductions, is first of all, you're going to obviously see, and this is really predictable, a decline in corporate income tax revenues at the federal level, and, as you might guess, meaningful increases in deficits, meaningful increases in the U.S. debt. If you look at the Congressional Budget Office, they'll tell you over 10 years, if we pass the 2017 tax reductions, you'll get about a $3 trillion increase in the federal debt deficits, and about a $467 billion increase in interest payments by the federal government. We got to get that money from somewhere, and that's when we have a collision between tax policy, the increase in deficits, and then trade policy, tariffs, when you start to get increases in tariffs. We should talk about that.
Well, let's talk a bit about it. And, I've been noticing, as I'm sure you have, how little conversation there has been about the size of deficits and sort of what this might mean. There aren't many fiscal hawks left in Washington these days, it seems like. But you bring up this kind of convergence of, yes, the potential continuation of those Trump tax cuts and these tariffs policies. We heard the former president last night here in New York at Madison Square Garden making the case, as he has before, specious as it might be, that you could do away with taxes and just have tariffs pay for everything. The numbers here tell a different story.
Yeah, they do. And the most important thing is, if you do get, first of all, they're very wedded to reducing taxes, or basically extending the 2017 tax policies, tax reductions. So that's very important. Now, the question is, okay, how are you going to pay for them? The way you pay for them is the way we've always paid for them. A lot of it comes from households, but a significant portion of what we pay for, as far as the deficit's concerned, is from foreign investors. Now, if you do have increased taxes or tariffs, roughly 10 to 20% universal baseline tax increases, you've heard about 60% on imports from China. You've heard about specific taxes on things like automobiles from Mexico, 100%. Increases in tariffs, that's not going to endear those folks that are getting, those countries that are getting increased taxes or increased tariffs. That's not going to endear them to financing our federal deficits. So it's going to get a lot more difficult to finance those deficits as we move through the next 10 years. Very difficult. What does that mean? That probably means you're going to have to offer higher interest rates to get that done, and higher interest rates is likely to have some weight on the outcome for the economy. And I would add, and I hesitate to add this, if you look back at the Great Depression of 1929 to 1939, one of the principal reasons that we had that depression was because we had such significant tariffs. Remember the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which led the U.S. economy, the world economy, quite frankly, into a depression. So the point being is very simple. If you reduce taxes, you get a big deficit, you get a big debt, has to be financed. A lot of it gets financed by foreign investment or capital flows, and they're not going to be happy about it if we're imposing, at the same time, we're imposing significant tariffs on them. So this is what I'm just simply saying, is that when we move into the next administration, either one, when we move into the next administration, the risks are going to get a little bit higher, and they have to be watched very carefully. Things are good now, but we've got to watch them very carefully as we move into the next administration. I hope that's clear. This is not an easy subject to understand.
Hugh, what is your view of the current economic situation here in the U.S.? It seems like GDP, still pretty solid. Inflation coming down. Most people who want a job have jobs. Their wages are growing. What's your view of this U.S. economy right now?
It's about as good as you could possibly get. Read The Economist magazine, and they'll tell you the same thing on the recent issue. It's very good. You're absolutely right. GDP is solid. It's slowing. Employment is slowing. The economy is slowing. Personal disposable income slowing. Personal consumption slowing, but very solid. You're likely to get lower numbers after the third quarter numbers. Third quarter be around 3%, but then we'll be looking at 1.5% to 2%, fourth quarter, first quarter, second quarter of 2025. That's soft landing. and inflation will be coming down. The Federal Reserve will be reducing short-term interest rates. Long-term interest rates should be coming down under those conditions, and stock prices should be doing better. Very good. That's the good news. The not so good news, at least in my judgment, everybody sees this differently, is we're a little bit high or pricey or overvalued. That's one problem. And I'm a little bit worried that I see such widespread optimism, which means if we got a 6 to 8% correction, I would welcome it because we'd get to levels that I think attractive, would be much more attractive for investors. But basically, when you look ahead, everything you say is correct. The outlook, prospects, the economy is really good, really solid, soft landing. I don't dismiss the case for a hard landing, but I don't think that's a very good case.
Hugh, thanks so much for joining us. As always, appreciate getting your perspective. Hugh Johnson, he's the chairman at Hugh Johnson Economics. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. Former President Donald Trump held a rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City on Sunday to deliver his campaign's closing argument. Trump urged his supporters to turn out at the polls.
The fate of our nation is in your hands. Next Tuesday, you have to stand up and you have to tell Kamala Harris that you've done a terrible job.
There were quite a few warm-up acts before Donald Trump took the stage at the nearly 6-hour rally. And one act is getting blowback. Comedian Tony Hinchcliffe made a joke about Puerto Rico, calling it an island of floating garbage. The Trump campaign later came out in opposition to Hinchcliffe's words, saying it is not a reflection of how Mr. Trump or his campaign regards Puerto Rico. Vice President Kamala Harris campaigned Sunday in Philadelphia. She held a rally to draw a distinction between her campaign and that of her Republican opponent, Donald Trump.
We are focused on the future, and we are focused on the needs of the American people, as opposed to a Donald Trump who spends full time looking in the mirror, focused on himself.
Pennsylvania is an important battleground state in the general election. Japan's ruling coalition failed to win a majority in parliament, setting up a race to form a government and potentially leading to political instability. The Liberal Democratic Party suffered a significant loss, with the main opposition, Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, securing 148 seats. Game 3 of the World Series is tonight at Yankee Stadium. The Dodgers are up against New York, and they have a 2-0 lead. And for our listeners on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, you can hear tonight's Monday Night Football game as the New York Giants, the G-Men, travel to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. Live on Bloomberg 1130, pregame coverage starts at 6:30. Global news, 24 hours a day. And whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. All right, folks, what would you like to hear about on Bloomberg Radio? Help make shows like ours even better by taking our Bloomberg audience survey. Visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast and click on the link in our profile or community section to take the survey, which is hosted by our partners at Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. Looking at the futures market here, S&P up 22 points. That's 0.4%. The Nasdaq's up 105 points. That's 0.5%. Yields, 10-year Treasury up just slightly, 4.25% on your 10-year Treasury. The 2-year is 4.10%. WTI crude oil off 6.2%, $67.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures showing signs of a rebound on Wall Street after the S&P 500 clocked its first weekly decline in 7. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, 113 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 110 points. S&P futures up 0.4%, 23 points. To the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.11%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.25%. And that's up 1 basis point. To currencies, we have the dollar weaker. Japanese yen weakened to a 3-month low right now at 152.50 against a dollar, down about 0.1%. We have the euro, British pound stronger. Bitcoin up about 1.5% at around 68,000. Few companies making news. It is Apple, expected to reveal more information about its Mac computer lineup this week. That will include M4 processors. Then you also have that software update. It's also expected that it would bring Apple Intelligence to the latest iPhone. In other news, trade tracking data shows that Russia is receiving top-end Dell servers containing AI chips made by NVIDIA or AMD from an Indian pharma company. And finally, the information reporting that Google plans to preview AI technology that takes over a web browser to complete tasks like research and also shopping. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura, he's sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. Looking at WTI crude oil off 6.1% here, just above $67 per barrel, in reflection of a muted response by Israel against Iran for that missile attack a couple of weeks ago. Let's get the latest on the developments coming out of the Middle East here. We're more than a year into this war. Jack Devine joins us. He's the founder and he's the chairman of the Arkin Group. And Jack is also a 32-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, so he has some experience in these matters. Jack, what's your latest read coming out of the Middle East here? Again, I think the most recent data point would be Iran's response to the missile attacks on Iran. They could have gone a lot broader, a lot wider, a lot deeper. They chose not to. What's your read of what's going on there in the Middle East?
Well, I think Israel has demonstrated tremendous power, and by contrast, the adversary's tremendous weakness, much less than many people anticipated. Right at this minute, I would say Israel's in the catbird seat. Their adversaries are pushing, I think now pushing for a ceasefire. They got their back up against the wall.
You know, I'm very curious here, sort of how you see this playing out going forward. So they're in the catbird seat, Iran with their back against the wall. Has this sort of tit for tat ended at this point in time? Where do you see things going here? Of course, this all kicked off with Iran attacking Israel a few weeks back.
Yeah, my read is that Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas all know that there's no bouncing back right now, right? You can only get beat up more. The fact that the Israelis went in with 100 airplanes, right? Not a single one shot down. That tells you Iran is tremendously vulnerable. The Israelis could take it off tomorrow and bomb the oil fields, can bomb the nuclear sites, but they won't be able, I think, to do the damage at this point without sustained attack. But I think they've decided not to do that. Theirs was restrained. The Israelis could do more, but it was powerful. Now the Iranians are passing it off as, oh, it wasn't so bad. Well, it was pretty bad, but it didn't hit the two things. I think there was a deal made with Washington, understandable in this case. So I think they're trying to find a way to catch their breath. And I think that's true with Hezbollah. Remember, all the leadership has been wiped out of Hamas and Hezbollah. Both places have taken a tremendous beating. They need to regroup. So I think, they're going to negotiations now. Egypt and Hamas have agreements and they're discussing them. But I think, Netanyahu's sitting in a strong place. He's going to ask for a bigger price. What's that price? One will be the northern territory. The Israelis get back into it, and they cease with the firing. And the hostages right up front, number one, have to be released. He's going to argue. He's holding all the cards. He's going to have a tough bargain. They could have gotten to maybe a little less a little while ago, perhaps. But right now, just because they say they want to cease fire, it'll be more on his terms. You got to watch these negotiations. It's not going to be simple. There'll be some fine print that have long-term implications.
Well, Jack, I mean, I guess my next question would be timing. If Netanyahu and Israel are in such a good place, given developments over the last several weeks, how do you think this is going to play out in terms of timing? Is this something that we could see in the next days and weeks, or is there still more posturing on either side?
Well, I think the whole world has stopped. We go through the motions until Election Day in the United States, right? Because everyone around the world is factoring in how that plays out, including in the Middle East. I think it's going to be less dramatic, except in this one place. I think the difference between the two parties may be different, at least in the short term on Iran. But I think nothing's meaningful. This is my view. I mean, there might be some last minute release of hostages or something, but I really think nothing is going to happen until after Election Day. So timing. The second thing is, I think the Israelis have now demonstrated, their effectiveness and the vulnerability of Iran. They too, I think, want the hostages. They need to regroup. I think taking out the nuclear site changes everything. So I think that was taken off the table temporarily. But let me make one final point in that. If they look like after this is over, the Iranians, despite whatever they're saying, tried to ratchet up the nuclear program, and if they get within the 6-month range, then I think we'll see much more rigorous response an effective response from Israel with our support.
Jack, I want to draw on your experience kind of observing the relationship between the U.S. and Israel over the years, and you mentioned just a few minutes ago the fact that perhaps Israel's retaliatory strike here was more limited in part because they were listening to the counsel of the administration of the United States. We've heard over the course of this conflict kind of mixed messaging about the degree to which Israel is listening to the U.S., is following the lead. Of course, that incursion into Lebanon was something that the Biden administration didn't want to have happen. What's your sense, your assessment of the quality of that relationship today, the degree to which Israel is taking the advice of the U.S. here as it pursues wars on many fronts?
I think the relationship is a really good one. It really doesn't change with administrations because our risks are so vitally intertwined. But you have to look at with Netanyahu. I mean, I know he's very controversial, including within the Israeli community, but he has run a very effective program. So he listens. He's listening, but then he recalculates it within what he thinks is possible and how much he can move us, right? So I think he's listening, but I think he's decided, I think I've got this one right. I'm gonna factor it in, but I'll factor it in unless it's contrary to what I think needs to be played here. This is true internally as well. So I think he's listening, but he's decided there's one way to handle this problem, and he's pursuing a very specific plan. If he's not going against the nuclear targets, it's because he also feels that this might be not quite the right moment, and it's opening Pandora's box, and he's not ready for it. So it's a really interesting and complex relationship, but people shouldn't get confused about who our ally is, and I don't think either administration is confused that the importance of Israel in the Middle East and stability. So I cut through the political jabbering, if you will, and I'm convinced the relationship is solid, but he's driving it with all due respect to our influence around the world. But Jack, it'll look like he's listening.
Jack, always great to get your thoughts and your perspective. Jack Devine, folks, he's a founder and chairman of the Arkin Group. He is a 32-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, where he served as both acting director and associate director of the CIA's operations outside the United States, as well as chief of the Latin American division, the head of the CIA's Counter-Narcotics Center, and head of CIA's Afghan Task Force. So he's got some experience.
Yes, fair amount. Running the farm for a while there as the acting director too. So
exactly, it's CIA, not the CIA.
That's right.
So interesting stuff there. So we appreciate getting some of his thoughts there. But again, maybe a little bit of a position of strength here for Israel, and maybe that might be the impetus for getting some peace discussions underway. Looking at the markets here, futures still a little bit higher. We've got the S&P up about 22 points. That's 0.4%. The Nasdaq's up 112 points. That's about 0.5%, giving back a little bit. Yields pretty steady here. The 10-year Treasury 4.24%. The news today is really on the commodities front. We have got WTI crude oil off 6.1%. We're now back down to $67 per barrel. So again, that risk premium really coming out of global oil. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. NASDAQ futures, leading the charge this morning on a jam-packed week of tech earnings from Google parent Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. This week's U.S. economic agenda, that's also jam-packed. A number of government reports, including jobs data on Friday. We also have GDP on Wednesday. Let's get to NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, 105 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 96 points. S&P futures up 0.3%, or 20 points. We have the two-year yield 4.10%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.25%. That's up 1 basis point. Few companies making news. Volkswagen. Workers in Germany will stop production today to protest plans to close factories. Now, how many? It's labor chiefs at VW looking to close at least 3 German plants and push a 10% salary cut to reduce costs. Their shares down 1% in Germany. And Porsche shares dropped after reporting earnings fell short of analysts' expectations. Shares down 3% in Germany. And finally, shares of Dutch medical technology firm Royal Philips, they fell the most in 26 years. The reason why? It slashed its sales growth forecast for the year due to slowing demand from China. It's now down 17% in Amsterdam. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura is sitting in for Tom Keene this morning. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. I don't know, 8 days to the election. I guess, one of the many questions is, will anything change? Can anything change between now and Election Day? Let's check in with somebody who thinks about this stuff for a living. Jennifer Lawless, politics professor at the University of Virginia, the Cavaliers, Charlottesville, Virginia, one of my faves. Jennifer, we had this rally, I guess, last night from former President Trump at Madison Square Garden. A, what do you think the purpose of that rally was? And B, did Mr. Trump accomplish maybe what he sought out to accomplish?
Morning. I think the purpose of the rally was to go back to New York as what Donald Trump perceives a winner. The last time he was there, he was facing various felony counts. He was found guilty. He's had trial after trial there, and it really hasn't been the city that he always thought was his own. And so as a final campaign tour stop, I think he wanted to go to New York, rally his base, and sort of claim the city. From that perspective, he did it, but he doubled down on rhetoric that would energize the most extreme aspects and elements of his base. But there was nothing he said that would win over any undecided voter. So this was a turnout attempt, and we'll see if it works in 8 days.
It's been 9 years that I've been asking this question, but is there method to the madness there? Is this a shrewd calculation on his part to cater to that niche of his base? Or is it a mistake here with, as Paul said, 8 days to go, to not go broad, not try to at least present a big tent into which people could come?
Well, the thing that's been really interesting about this election cycle is that people were decided pretty early on, and there's been very little movement. We've been totally tied in the polls nationally and in all of the battleground states for months. And so given that there are so few undecided voters, this is a completely legitimate strategy. The Harris campaign is trying to do not only that, but also persuade that tiny sliver that's left. But it's unclear how many people there really are.
So is there any movement possible for either side between now and next Tuesday, Professor?
There's probably 1% of people who could be swayed at this point or who are unsure if they're going to turn out because they're not in love with either candidate. But it does seem to me like over the course of the next 8 days, the best thing that the campaigns can do is make sure that every supporter they have goes to the polls and casts a ballot for the respective candidate.
I know there's something you've studied and written about is the role of young people in elections. And I guess this kind of picks up on what we were talking about a moment ago, the kind of groups that Donald Trump is reaching out to. Of course, Kamala Harris doing something similar. But bearing your experience in mind here, how difficult is it to get young people to come to the polls? I think of just, who's tends to have apathy or ennui about elections. Is it something that a candidate can count on, getting young people to show up or to mail those ballots in early?
It's a really precarious basket in which to put your eggs. If you're coming down to the wire and you're relying on people who are first-time voters and who are young first-time voters, it's really challenging. Now, there are two different things going on here that could mitigate that challenge. On the Democratic side, Kamala Harris has reproductive rights as her major issue when she's targeting young women. And that seems to have worked in the midterm elections and in special elections since Dobbs was overturned. And Donald Trump is making a really, really aggressive play for young men in a way that previous candidates haven't. So it's possible that motivating them and activating them will pay off. But you're still much better off trying to get people who have previously voted to vote again.
How are you thinking about down ballot voting here? Is there any trends? Is it going to break like the presidential election is going to break, or is it unique?
I think it's a little bit different this cycle. Maryland is a perfect example. It's likely that Angela Ashbrooks, who's the Democrat running against Larry Hogan for the Senate race, will win. But Hogan is significantly outperforming Trump in Maryland as a Republican. He was the Republican governor of a very Democratic state. And his message has basically been vote for Harris and vote for Hogan. And so we've got a little bit more of an explicit attempt this cycle to encourage voters to engage in split ticket voting, which we haven't seen in quite some time.
I'm very curious about the Republican apparatus, political apparatus at this point in time. So, yes, Donald Trump came on stage last night after 5 hours of other speakers. Sure, there were some candidates there for office in the mix there. But, you have his daughter-in-law running the Republican National Committee. This is such a solidly Trump party now. How much thought is the Republican Party given to how to bolster or fortify the candidacies or campaigns of those Republicans running for Senate seats or House seats? How much is that sort of front of mind for him and front of mind for the entire Republican Party?
I don't think it's front of mind for Donald Trump at all. He sort of begrudgingly mentions the other candidates who are running when he's performing in different states and when he's holding rallies in various battlegrounds. For the Republican apparatus, I don't think Laura Trump cares that much about it either, but there are party chairs in each of the states, and there's an entire party committee that does want to make sure that the Republicans take control of the Senate and they hold the House. And they're running a campaign this cycle where the person at the top of the ticket is not really interested in helping. Without a coordinated campaign, it becomes very difficult, and it becomes almost impossible for there to be any real surprises. It's unlikely that dark horse candidates are going to make their way through if there's no help from the top. On the Democratic side, that's obviously not what's going on, and it's probably the reason the Democrats have a good shot at taking back the House.
Jennifer, early voting, it's much a bigger story than it was in past elections. What do we know from some of the early voting, if anything?
We know that Democrats have a clear advantage in early voting, but that's not a surprise. And so the question becomes, is the enthusiasm that we're seeing among early voters going to also translate on Election Day? If it does, that bodes well for Republicans. If it doesn't, then the Democrats are off to a very good start. I should note, though, that the Republicans are doing more early voting now than they have in the past, despite Donald Trump. The Republican Party has really made a case that getting your vote in early is a good way to make sure that it's counted early.
Jennifer, I have to deal with all the jokes from Paul and others about, how long am I going to be in Pennsylvania after election night? How long is all of this going to last? Let me use that as a pivot point to ask you what the prospect for legal challenges looks like here. We've lived through it during the last election. We certainly lived through it back in 2000. What's your sense of that landscape and how that's going to attenuate that period of time when we're not going to know officially who the winner is, perhaps?
My sense is that if it looks like Donald Trump is losing, or if it looks like it's very close in any of the battleground states, there will be a plethora of legal challenges that will likely go nowhere. The same thing was what we saw in 2020. All of these state boards of elections, all of the various precinct captains are all very, very clear about wanting to run a secure, safe election. And there's no evidence to suggest that they haven't and that they won't in 2024. In fact, public opinion polls show that voters generally believe that their vote gets counted. They worry that other people's votes aren't counted. And Republicans in particular question the integrity of the election cycle. But they believe that when they cast a ballot, it does get counted. So I think it will be much ado about nothing, but it could be much ado about nothing for quite some time. Is your great fear that, if it's close, Donald Trump declares victory before all those mail-in ballots are counted, before all of this shakes out? So what would what's your worst case scenario for what could happen here? Oh, I think that's definitely what's going to happen. He's going to declare victory in Pennsylvania at like 9 o'clock, despite the fact that none of the early vote is counted yet. We know he's going to do that. My fear is a very, very close election where ultimately it will come down to a few hundred or a few thousand votes in a couple of states. If either candidate demonstrates a decisive victory, that becomes a lot more difficult. And frankly, if Donald Trump wins the election, Kamala Harris will concede and we won't be in this situation. But I think that the only thing that could keep Donald Trump from really wreaking a lot of havoc is a decisive Kamala Harris win.
Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us. Jennifer Lawless, she's a professor of politics at the University of Virginia. Economic Indicators today are brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn more. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul and David and Lisa. Donald Trump turned to the home stretch of his campaign with the nearly 6-hour rally in the heart of Manhattan, flanked by Elon Musk and other allies. Trump's event at Madison Square Garden featured criticisms of Vice President Kamala Harris over the border, crime, and the economy. But Bloomberg's Bill Ferry says it was the comments by some of the other speakers that are making headlines this morning.
There were a lot of comments, including some by a comedian who was there, that have been really taken to task overnight. A lot of insulting Puerto Rico, saying it's a floating island of garbage. That has been latched upon by a lot of Harris supporters, prominent Puerto Ricans in the United States, saying that that it reflects how the Trump campaign views the island and views Puerto Ricans.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. Some Puerto Rican celebrities, including rapper Bad Bunny and Jennifer Lopez, showed support for Kamala Harris following that comment. Vice President Kamala Harris, meanwhile, took to X, where she announced a plan to boost Puerto Rico's economy and power grid. Pro-Western opposition parties in Georgia are crying foul at Saturday's parliamentary elections that leave pro-Moscow parties with a majority. With surveys showing a vast majority of Georgians wanting to join the European Union, observers fanned across Georgia. The head of the European delegation, Antonio Lopez Torres White, says irregularities were detected by observers.
We express deep concern about the democratic backsliding in Georgia. We fear that the climate of hatred and intimidation that was also mentioned before we witness on the election day could seriously undermine the political process in Georgia.
Georgia's president, who wants to join the EU, says her country was a victim of a Russian special operation trying to alter the outcome. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Bloomberg Surveillance today is brought to you by Build America Mutual. BAM Mutual insures municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of building America. Invest in BAM insured bonds. All right, David Gura, 8 days until the election. I just can't imagine anything moving the needle one way or another.
No, and interesting to hear kind of a contrast or a rhetorical disagreement between Henrietta Treyz and Jennifer Lawless on this issue of early voting. And
Yep.
I think, Henrietta Treyz is much more pessimistic that, Democrats are going to have much of an edge, the edge they used to have in early voting because Republicans have embraced it so much. Jennifer Lawless at Virginia still believing that because of how much Democrats have capitalized on it in the past, they're going to have an edge here going forward. But I mean, that scenario that she described there at the end, I think is one that we're all kind of thinking through.
How many states have early voting? It's a
Not
handful.
sure of the exact total, but Pennsylvania, where I'm going, doesn't have in-person early voting, so it's all by mail, and so there are different kind of varieties and flavors of it. And something that Henrietta brought up, I'd love to look into, is just sort of what the turnout has been like in Georgia, where there has been such a concerted effort to get folks to the polls ahead of Election Day.
Okay, we'll keep on top of that. Looking at the futures market here, 45 minutes before the cash open, we got the S&P up 30 points. That's a 0.5%. And the NASDAQ up a little bit better than that. It's up about 0.7%. So green on the screen here. Big earnings week for corporate America. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures on the rise. NASDAQ futures leading the gains up 0.7%, 149 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 162 points. S&P futures up 0.5% or 30 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.10%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.24%, and that is little change. To commodities, have to point out oil. Brent crude down 6% at $71 a barrel. WTI crude down 6% as well at $67 a barrel. Companies making news. Eli Lilly expects to sell its popular weight loss drug Mounjaro in Hong Kong as early as next year. Its shares are up about 0.5%. And shares of Trump Media and Technology Group, DJT ticker, well, they're up 8% after presidential candidate Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden event in New York. And finally, Amazon in talks to lease space along Fifth Avenue in New York City, taking over space from HSBC. The reason why? Well, more workers returning to the office. That's according to the New York Post. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that very much. David Gura, he's sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. Inflation, one of the key issues in this election cycle. We've obviously from the pandemic had an extraordinary amount of inflation, but the inflation rate, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, which tracks the degree of changes in prices, showed a 2.4% increase in September from a year ago. That's 0.2 percentage points lower than the average since Bill Clinton in 2000. So inflation in terms of growth is under control. But boy, you go out there and you talk to the folks out there in the electorate, and they don't feel that. And I think it's just kind of the prices are higher, the rate might be lower, but boy, the prices are higher. But our next guest did some real digging on this whole inflation story. He went out to Dingman's Ferry, Pennsylvania. No idea where that is.
Pike County, Pennsylvania.
Matt Winkler, editor-in-chief emeritus of Bloomberg News, the founder of Bloomberg News, joins us here in our studio. Matt, you went out to Pennsylvania. What did you find as it relates to inflation and how it's really impacting people?
Well, if you went to the supermarket, and by the way, great to be with you on this subject, go to the supermarket, and Pike County is the home of Dingman's Ferry, or Dingman's Ferry is in Pike County. And it happens to be a pretty red, shall we say, political area in the Northeast. And if you went to the supermarket anytime this month, you could have gotten a choice porterhouse steak for $7.99. Wow. If you were a regular customer. If you weren't a regular customer, you had to pay $14. But even at $14, that's a price that's less than what we paid before the pandemic. So there's an example. Not a steak lover. There are all kinds of bargains at your fingertips right now. And if you just traveled across the Delaware River to New Jersey, the most densely populated state, you could get gas at $2. You ready for this? And 79 cents a gallon. Now, that's well below where it was in 19, in 18, and even 17. So these are just two examples where the actual price of stuff, food and energy, is actually less. But speaking to the bigger issue is what's happened during the Biden economy is the affordability of food and energy, of everything, is much lower. Okay, the cost is much lower than it was at any time in the period right after the pandemic. So we're back to where we were. In fact, we're even better than where we were because people have had wage gains, significant wage gains, since 2021 when Biden took office, and right now they can afford to pay for anything, and it's a lot easier on their pocketbook. In fact, I guess the takeaway here is that everyone's pocketbook right now is much more accurate than anyone's vibe.
Very good line. And going back to what Paul said just about this kind of gap that we've seen between what the data are telling us and how people are feeling, to what do you attribute that? Is it a lack of economic literacy? I was watching CBS Face the Nation with our friend and former colleague Margaret Brennan this weekend, and she sat down with the vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, who said that his running mate was going to bring prices down. There's a sense of the badness of the economy, first and foremost, but then also just kind of a misapprehension, as I see it, about what the cure is going to be for what we've seen here. Talk a bit about that, why we see this gap.
I think you answered your own question, insofar as every time a lie gets repeated, it's amplified. And so if one side says prices are high, and our profession, such as it is, repeats that assertion, even though it's completely false, and does it again and again, and doesn't do the reporting that I just shared with you, which is share with people, oh, by the way, if you need to get gasoline right now, hello, major networks, where are the reporters? You know, when gas was $5 a barrel, $5 a gallon at the pump, every network news station sent a reporter out to the gas station and said, ask people how they feel. And of course they felt lousy. No one's sending anybody out to the gas station these days. No one's sending anybody to the supermarket. No one's sending anybody anywhere. Sights and Sounds reporting has somehow gone out of business.
I mean, your opinion pieces, Matt, as always, are chock full of data. And this is one that kind of jumped out at me, and this is a message I don't think that's getting out there. I didn't know it. Thanks in part to big wage gains over the past couple of years, spending on food now makes up just 7.44% of consumer spending, the lowest since the pandemic in February of 2020. And that's according to the Bureau of Economics analysis. I feel like I'm somewhat literate in terms of day-to-day news. I didn't know that.
Well, it's right under our nose. And so, I do think the culprit, sadly, is on us. When I say it's on us, it's on the news business, so to speak. This is what we should have been reporting. It's fine to report, as we did, that prices were going up when they did, but we should simultaneously have the incentive to report prices going down, or that we can afford the prices that we have. And that's just a story that everybody, mainstream media, national media, local media, has just avoided. So it's not a surprise that the polls would come back and say people are still feeling unhappy because they're just not getting the news.
It's a story of media criticism, but you could also apply similar criticism to Democratic candidates in particular, because there still seems to be some trepidation to how they approach this issue. That I think that you look at what Kamala Harris says about the economy, for instance, I think she's reluctant, as I see it, to mention some of the things that you do in your piece for fear of alienating voters who still feel like things are
right,
tough.
because you're not going to give her the benefit of the doubt. And because you're not going to give her the benefit of the doubt, why should she go there? And why should she tell people that their feelings are wrong? That's a mistake politically. So that's the simple reason why Democrats don't do it. But they're not going to get any help from the so-called truth sayers, us, to say, well, but prices are lower. We're not saying that in any of those conversations. We're just saying Democrats are weak because they don't tell the real story, because they don't want to tell people that their feelings are misplaced.
And the other part of this whole inflation story, as your data points out, is wages have actually been growing. And they've now, since I guess the beginning, you're saying since early 2023, have been growing faster than inflation. So that's I think
and
that's
that story is
story
on the White House website, and that story is in the campaign. And Georgia is a manufacturing hub today because of Biden legislation that brought EV factories and battery factories to Georgia. And the average semiconductor salary in Arizona is 3 percentage points higher than the national average today, for precisely the same reason, because this has been the best economy for jobs, well, since I was a newspaper boy at the age of 11 years old. How about that?
How about that? That's probably going back a few years. I'm just guessing. Matt Winkler, thanks so much for joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Check out that piece on the Bloomberg Terminal and at Bloomberg.com/opinion. Matt Winkler, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of Bloomberg News. To me, he's the founder of Bloomberg News. And he found something that's important. That gets your attention, Matt Winkler. Shinpei, also part of the team, cranking out the data and helping Matt with all that great work at Bloomberg Opinion. Looking at the markets here, we got 35 minutes till we open this thing. She's in charge of opening these markets. I'm not. S&P's up 30 points. That's 0.5%. The Dow's up 160 points. That's 0.4%. The NASDAQ, as the kids call it, the tech-heavy NASDAQ, up 150 points at 0.7%. The 10-year Treasury, I mean, you can get paid 4.1%. I mean, I'm sorry, 4.24% to hold a 10-year Treasury. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Lori Calvasina, head of U.S. equity strategy at RBC Capital Markets, to get her thoughts on kind of what she's seeing here in these markets and in these earnings. Alex Marsh, CIO at FM Investments, on the investor playbook for the presidential election and the Fed, in studio. How about that? Another one. Mary Hines Drosch, head of product for consumer Business and Wealth Management, Banking and Lending at the Bank of America. How about that for a title? She's going to be in our studio here and get her...
Hard to fit on a business card.
Well, it's Bank of America. You go to these big banks, and they're all in on the titles. I don't know. She's going to be in studio, so that's also cool. Gautam Mukunda, lecturer at Yale University. He wears a Harvard pin on his lapel. Just to rub it into his students because he went to Harvard in undergrad. Anyway, he's going to be in studio talking to us about the election. So we got a lot of folks that are up and out of bed coming into the studio, and we appreciate that. Right now, let's go to Lisa Mateo and get a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And you got it. We got futures on the rise. The start of a big earnings week. Big tech is in focus. Reports from Google parent Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon as well. And today we have Ford that's opening its books after the close. So we'll get the NASDAQ futures now up 0.7%, 162 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, 189 points. S&P futures up 0.5% or 34 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.10%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.24%, and that is little change. Commodities, oil falling. We have Brent crude down 6% at $71 a barrel. We have WTI crude at $67 a barrel. Spot gold down 0.5% at $2,733 an ounce. Companies making news, that would be Boeing. It launched a nearly $19 billion share sale to address its liquidity needs, but also to avoid potential credit rating downgrade to junk. And Quarter Pounders back on the menu at McDonald's with one big change, though. Onions. Like David said, you got to bring your own, I guess.
Get that Ziploc baggie.
Ziploc baggie works wonders. They were tied to that E. coli outbreak. The shares, though, they're on the mend. They're up more than 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Bloomberg Surveillance today brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit BNY.com. We got Tom Keene out on holiday today. David Gura and Paul Sweeney, we're here with you this morning. Let's go with Lori Calvasina. She's a strategist over there at RBC Capital Markets. I don't know. I mean, we've got another good kind of tape here. Futures, Lori. What have you taken away from earnings so far? I guess we're kind of halfway through the S&P 500. This week will be a monster week for S&P earnings. Lori, what have you learned from earnings, and what do you expect to see for the remainder?
All right, well, thanks for having me as always. And look, I would say there's still a lot of time for the stats to change. We've still got a lot to go through in the coming weeks. But really, we got to the end of last week, and when we ran the stats, and my team and I split up all the earnings call transcripts and kind of read through those. When I got to the end of the week, and frankly, Sunday, I just felt like it was mildly disappointing if I could, simplify it. And if you look at all the stats, the percent of companies beating consensus on earnings, just a very, very basic way to look at the health of the reporting season. It's fine. It's at 76%, but it came out at 80 last time. The revenue beats were actually, had me in an optimistic mood a couple of weeks ago because we were seeing that pick up from the last quarter. But now that's dipped down relative to where it was last quarter. And if you even just look at like headline S&P 500 bottom-up consensus earnings, a couple of weeks ago when I updated my own earnings model, that stat was tracking at 245. And as of Friday, it was tracking down a little below 242. So there's some softness in the numbers. And when we think about the commentary, and this is where I will give you a big caveat because I read a lot of industrial companies last week, so it may be a function of that. But I do felt like the tone was a little bit more negative, a little bit more mixed. And to be sure, there are still a lot of companies that are saying things are resilient, sort of emphasizing optimism, especially overcoming rate cuts or additional rate cuts. But at the same time, there were a lot of companies that were also, sort of talking about just sort of the weakness that they're experiencing. And, if I sort of summarized a lot of the commentary, but, with one phrase, it would be like, we've got to wait. We've got to wait for the impact of interest rates to come through. We've got to wait to get past the election. And we've got to wait for consumers to really sort of adjust to, so some of the lower inflation that's coming through. And it's not terrible. It's not great.
I want to get to the chart, your latest chart book. I mean, Lori's chart books, Paul, are legendary in their length and comprehensiveness, and we will get there in a moment. But you bring up that sense of uncertainty or waiting this out, and I'd love for you just to talk a bit more about that and how much, as you lend an ear to those earnings calls, executives are talking about the election in concrete terms and sort of what they're thinking about, really, these very divergent paths we could be going down here come November the 5th.
It's a great question. And, and by the way, the chart book is long and it keeps getting longer. We try to keep it short.
I'm not criticizing it. I'm not criticizing it at all.
But I always, if I take something out, I always end up talking about it, so we have to put it back in. But, we didn't actually have it in this week's chart book, but we had it last week, where we looked at just the stats. We use Bloomberg data, and we looked at the companies, just the level of companies across the U.S. equity market and their references to the U.S. presidential election and earnings calls. And you can actually get some great history on that. And we found that has spiked. If you looked through the end of September, we don't really have, the comprehensive data yet for where we are now, but that had already spiked coming into this reporting season to levels that we had seen back in late 2020 and back in late 2016. And so the companies are doing what they should be doing, right? They're talking about this about as much as it deserves. We've been seeing it build for several quarters now, and the best word to use is it just feels like people are getting stuck in corporate America. And if you look at the commentary, it's uncertainty, delays in decision making. I forget if it was at a conference or an earnings call, but I heard one company reference the idea recently that it's just taking much longer to get approval. And actually, at our industrial conference last month, I asked a company who had been talking about this in their presentation, and I said, what are people waiting for? And they sort of talked a bit, and then when they kind of finally got to the punchline, they said, look, we think people just want to get through this and know what they're dealing with. And ever since I heard that, it's really informed how I've read some of these earnings call transcripts, and I just see hints of that. And if you looked at last week, we had companies starting to rattle off more of a laundry list of issues, whether it was trade, tariffs, taxes, all the stuff we're focused on, in the investment world as well. And so they're starting to get more specific, but we have had some companies say, look, we expect tariffs to go up generally. We think they're here to stay. We'll be able to navigate either side. So companies are starting to say, like, we can handle whatever is coming, but they do need to know what's coming. And I frankly am starting to sense the same thing from equity investors as well, that they're starting to just get a bit stuck and just need to get through this so then they can start making informed decisions about what to do.
Lori, what are sectors might be screening well for you and your team these days?
So I would say the two that are really, sort of on my radar in meetings and in the data. One is healthcare, which we upgraded not too long ago. I know we had the providers and services sort of had a tough reporting season out of the gate. That was one area within healthcare that had been looking a little bit overvalued to us. But when I look broadly at the healthcare industries, we are seeing good valuations and good earnings revision trends. So I'm looking forward to seeing what more companies in that sector have to say. I do know a lot of non-U.S. investors were avoiding it at the beginning of the year because it's an election year. And we're clearly, kind of getting to the point where we're going to be past that risk. And frankly, our work with our analysts suggests that there's not a ton of risk on either side. If you think about another area, I would say financials. I think particularly the small cap financials look pretty cheap right now. And again, I wasn't feeling so great coming out of last week's reporting season, but I was coming pretty good feeling out of kind of that first wave, which was really financials driven. And we've actually seen 2024 consensus earnings growth estimates, if you use the consensus data, has actually come up a little bit for 2024. So we got good valuations, good earnings revisions. My analysts feel pretty confident. We're not really, actively baking in election views into that sector, but we do like the fact that they are reminding us that the plumbing of the economy is pretty strong. So we like what we're hearing from the companies there.
Lori, last question, just as we go into this busy week of tech earnings. And you talked about how you and your colleagues went through all the transcripts of those earnings calls from industrials last week. Are there things in tech that you are sort of keenly focused on or want to hear more about and expect to hear more about in that commentary this week?
So, I think just general, sort of business conditions. Obviously, everybody's going to be focused on the AI side of things. And I'm not saying that's not important, but I do want to hear what's going on outside of those businesses. I do think on the AI side, I felt like the commentary there last week was a little bit lighter than what I've been used to. And that, again, may be a function of the sector mix. But it has been interesting if you sort of trace the AI comments, going back over recent quarters, it's kind of tracked the sentiment of the equity market to some extent. I think where my head is coming into this is that we're just in the messy part of the AI transition, that there's still a lot of build that's going on, that we're starting to see some tangible results. A lot of those are small potatoes. But I do, look forward to hearing what those companies are saying about the overall trajectory there.
Lori, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting a few minutes of your time. Lori Calvasina, she is the head of U.S. Equity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. Donald Trump held a nearly 6-hour rally at New York's Madison Square Garden. It featured criticisms of Vice President Kamala Harris over crime, the economy, and the border.
The day I take the oath of office, the migrant invasion of our country ends and the restoration of our country begins.
One of Trump's warm-up acts bashed Puerto Rico. Vice President Kamala Harris made a pitch to the people of Puerto Rico to give her their vote.
He abandoned the island, tried to block aid after back-to-back devastating hurricanes, and offered nothing more than paper towels and insults.
Harris made her comments on X. Oil is sinking after Israel limited its retaliation to the missile barrage earlier this month to military sites in and around Tehran. Bloomberg's Ethan Bronner has more from Tel Aviv.
The assumption after Saturday was that, maybe enough is done on both sides. That was what President Biden said. But it's not clear that that's how the Iranians are taking it. And from what we can understand from Israeli officials, they are taking seriously the concern that Iran is not viewing it in that way.
Bloomberg's Ethan Bronner reports Iran's foreign ministry is saying it won't forego its right to respond to Israel's aggression. The UN sounds the alarm about greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases hit record highs in 2023. The World Meteorological Organization says levels of the three main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, all increased, with carbon dioxide accumulating in the atmosphere faster than ever, up more than 10% in 2 decades. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul David Leeson.
I'm Michael Barr. The business of sports. You don't stay up and watch you're here at like 2 o'clock in the morning. You're not staying up to watch this World Series, are you?
I can't.
You can't?
I can't. I have to catch the highlights, as I'm driving in. And, it's...
You can listen to the whole game, the long drive you have coming in.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, and that is true.
As long as it's not watching it on the drive.
Yeah, what do you do?
All right, so we got the Yankees. If you're a New York sports fan, I don't know what you got. The Yankees World Series, you got the Giants tonight, Monday Night Football.
Right.
So I guess it's a lot of picture-in-picture back and forth.
I've been using the YouTube TV function. You can watch 2 at once.
Really?
Yes, built in. And you pick which sound that you're getting, Can have a TV of big enough size to make that work, but
interesting. All right, very good. That's something.
Try to
So you
multitask
watch
where I
is
can.
YouTube TV your TV?
As of a couple weeks ago, I'm trying it out.
Okay.
And yeah, it's been good so far. Although I feel like I'm paying for cable again. It's like $80 a month or something. So.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Without the NFL Sunday ticket, which I think is much more than that.
Yes. Yes, it is.
All right, very good. Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We're going to get these markets open for you in a few moments here. We got some green on the screen. We'll take that to start this week. A lot of earnings coming up. A lot of the big tech. I think 5 of the Magnificent 7 names are reporting as well, so we'll stay on top of that all week. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we have futures showing signs of a rebound on Wall Street, and this is after the S&P 500 clocked its first weekly decline in 7. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, 154 points. Dow futures up 0.5%, 226 points. S&P futures up 0.5%, 34 points. We have the 2-year yield, 4.09%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.23%, and that is little change. To currencies, we have the dollar weaker. Japanese yen weakened to a 3-month low right now. The Japanese yen at 152.72 against the dollar. We have the euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up nearly 2% at around 68,000. Few companies making news. That's Apple, expected to reveal a little bit more information about its Mac computer lineup this week. That will include M4 chips and also that software update. That's expected, and that would bring Apple Intelligence to the latest iPhone. In other news, trade tracking data. Say that 5 times fast. It shows that Russia receiving top-end Dell servers. That's containing AI chips made by NVIDIA or AMD, and that's from an Indian pharma company. And you can add Robinhood to the list of retail brokerages, allowing traders to bet on election outcomes before next week's U.S. vote for president. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene this morning. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. All right, David, our next guest, he gets a bachelor's in science in chemical and biomolecular engineering from Cornell.
I went there and I know how difficult it is only by reputation. I was not wading in those waters myself.
Your parents are so proud. They're so proud on graduation day. And then what do? You go to Wall Street. I mean, what's up with that? I don't get it. And there's a million people like this guy. They all get these amazing degrees from these amazing schools, and they go work on Wall Street. I mean, who does that? Alex Marsh does it. He's the CIO of FM Investments. Alex, I mean, it's been a good 2024. I mean, fixed income's making money. S&P 500's up 22%. What do you do here? What are you telling your clients these days?
You know, I think we heard a little bit before. Just kind of wait for a few days. We got a big thing coming up. It's kind of weird. I just came up from Washington, D.C., where because of geo-targeting now, I get no political ads because we can't vote for anything. We put it right on license plates if you're uncertain about that. The instant I leave the district, all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's other elections going on out there. Who knew? But I think that's kind of it. Stay through it. We saw overnight, a really important hit, which is where the 10-year hit 4.25 and then bounced off. We see that resistance level, which I think shows you that's going to be the trading range for a little while. So kind of sit tight. And if you were in the short end of the curve, the sort of T-bill and chill trade, no reason to leave now. Mm-hmm. Let's give it a week or two, see what happens.
I think it was Larry Fink who expressed some fatigue at how much we talk about the importance of the election or elections. He noted they don't tend to matter in the long run. Are you in the same camp? But as you kind of game this out, yes, wait till the actual votes are cast. But how much of a difference do you anticipate it making? How much are you thinking about as you look forward past November the 5th?
I agree. There's a lot of fatigue that shouldn't underplay the importance of actually, having an election and voting and whatnot. But historically, it doesn't matter, right? The key is stay in the market. And there's a lot of charts floating around. We've got a few of our favorite. But if you miss those cycles, you lose. If you think, oh, it's not worth being a perma bull, you lose. So stay in the market. And you got to be long, and you got to be long equities. And there's a lot of these other little carry trades going on. It's like, oh, I don't really like high yield. Well, you got to at least have some market weighting there, because if you don't, you're going to get left behind. We also look at the tech space as that sort of, oh, this is one of those things. Who will they, won't they? You got to dance with the one that brung you. The tech's brought us this far. I think it's going to take us a while further. If you bought some Tesla shares and just stuck them in the back of your drawer, you're pretty happy last week.
Yes, exactly. It seems like, I'm an old-fashioned equity analyst. Earnings kind of matter to me, and I think they're starting to matter a little bit more to the market here. We kind of know what the Fed's going to do, so now let's focus on earnings. What have you seen so far in this earnings cycle? What do you think the market needs to see?
Yeah, I think earnings have been relatively strong, but they've been relatively well forecast without, with a handful of notable exceptions. But that's really important, right? Market really thrives on that predictability of we can do what we say we can do. Otherwise, why do we employ all the former Cornellians out there on the desk showing up at 5 a.m.? The Fed is the one who's really suffered from proving that they can't do that anymore. And that's where the two of these are going to fight each other. If your earnings are based on what you think the Fed is going to do, you're in for a real shock, because the Fed's going to do what it wants to do regardless of what earnings have done. But earnings have been strong. The consumer is still out there. And I know we heard about prices not being quite what we seem, but the reality is prices are still high and people are still buying. And that ultimately is good for margin.
I wonder, playing off of that, so when you look at the health and the state of the U.S. consumer, how much optimism or confidence do you have in that continuing to carry forward? So we've seen the pressure from credit cards, for instance, other indicators that maybe they are under kind of increasing pressure. Does that worry you as you kind of listen to earnings calls and pay attention to earnings? Is any of that manifesting itself in those data?
Yeah, I think the consumer is going to continue to spend. Like, people have tried, rather like betting against the yen in a widowmaker trade. You never bet against the American consumer. There's just a deep optimism that really is inherent to the debt these folks are taking out, and I like that. I like the theory of people are kind of betting on themselves, some maybe a little too much, but overall, folks are making that investment in themselves, their lifestyles. They're taking out, the real question will be housing prices there. How much can they take out debt to afford that next new house, and do they need to? But outside of that, from an actual consuming standpoint, things seem pretty good.
Are there certain sectors on the equity side that screen well for you guys these days? Are you spending your time in one sector versus another these days?
We still like tech. It's hard not to like tech. We heard earlier about healthcare, and we like small cap healthcare. We're coming out with a thematic small cap healthcare ETF in the next week or so to really take advantage of that, because we think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Is that biotech focused or just more healthcare broadly?
Sort of life sciences focused, but there's a little bit of biotech sitting in that portfolio. We like the small cap side. That's where some of the great ideas can really come through. That isn't to say big companies don't have them. It's just you can make a lot more money, and if you're going to take that sort of risk in your portfolio, you deserve to have some upside reward.
Going back to the dance and the one that brung you, as you put it, when you look at AI and sort of where we are in the evolution of, yes, it's development, but in kind of market sense of it as well, where are we? And so, we're looking ahead to some of these Mag 7 companies announcing their earnings later this week. Are we seeing more broadening? Do you have to see more broadening? You bring up healthcare. I hear from a lot of folks that's where this is going to kind of manifest itself or transition to next, that kind of marriage of AI and healthcare is going to bear a lot of fruit.
I think so. I think it's going to happen everywhere, though. Right? I'll borrow Larry Fink's comment. I'm sort of fatigued about AI. Once every company started changing .com to .ai, and everyone thought, I'm going to get 5x turns in valuation by just putting AI somewhere in my pitch deck. Realized that's sort of the peak moment for that mattering. The reality is it's going to sit everywhere, and I think this is where it's a global game. We have to pay attention now. In Denmark, they put together a new supercomputer. They had NVIDIA on stage and the king, and they put this new supercomputer together. It has like 500 cores. The AI engine that Elon Musk runs has 100,000 of the same cores. So we have to kind of keep some of this in perspective. It's going to happen everywhere, but scale is going to matter a great deal. It's the speed at which you can train those large language models, the speed at which you can derive the innovation elsewhere. But eventually, 10 years, 15 years from now, we're not going to think of AI. We're going to have a new name for the next thing. It's just going to be so embedded in everything we do, from healthcare to going to the supermarket, where now I just walked into a convenience store. I tried to check out, and the guy told me, no, you just put it all here, and the cameras do the thing, and you walk out. It's just wild.
That is great.
I thought I was stealing something.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Alex Morris, he's the CIO, FM Investments, based down there in Washington, D.C., riding the Acela train back up here. That's how it works. It gets Balchunas here most days.
Yes,
occasionally.
mostly frequently.
So we'll keep an eye on
Modify that.
All right, Lisa Mateo, it's her job to get these markets open. She'll be doing that in just a moment. We got some green on the screen, and futures up about 0.5%. The NASDAQ up a little bit better than that, so we'll keep an eye on that. A lot of earnings this week, although not NVIDIA. They're not until November.
Yes, I misspoke. November, like late November.
Yes, I mean, it's just, but I guess they can. I guess you're up. Stock's up 185%. You can do whatever you want.
Write the release now.
Yes, exactly. They release when they want to release. But we're going to get 5 of the big mega cap 7 names here are going to be reporting this week.
Microsoft, Amazon.
Yep.
The
some
lot.
of the big names there. So we'll get a good sense on cloud spending, and we're going to get some more indications on the digital advertising business global when you hear from the likes of Google and Facebook and Amazon. Amazon's got a huge advertising business right now. They kind of built that out of nothing in the space of like 5 years. So extraordinary there. Looking at WTI crude oil today, off 6.3%. Seeing that risk premium come out of global crude. WTI crude oil, $67.28 per barrel. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this opening bell report is sponsored by JP Morgan Asset Management. Stay informed on today's fastest investment vehicle with new guide to ETFs. Visit jpmorgan.com/ETF insights to learn more. All right, another big earnings week. Almost half of the S&P 500 reports over the next 10 days. Tech playing a big part. Alphabet, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, Apple, all reporting. There's also more economic data on tap. We have jobs data Friday and GDP on Wednesday. So let's see how things start to kick off the new trading week. We'll start with the S&P 500 right now, up 0.5%, 29 points at 5,837. The Dow up 0.5%, 236 points, 42,353. And the Nasdaq up 0.7%, 130 points, 18,646. We have the 2-year yield, 4.10%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.24%. And that is little changed as well. Want to head to commodities. Brent crude down 5% at $71 a barrel. We have WTI crude at $67 a barrel. To currencies, we have the dollar weaker. Japanese yen at 152.62 against the dollar. We have the euro, British pound stronger. Bitcoin up more than 1.5% at around 68,000. At the open, want to also check in with shares of Boeing. They are down nearly 1%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and David.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. So you can just search YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. As we head into the holiday season here, increase in demand for gift cards this season. According to Bank of America's recent holiday gift card survey, 75% of consumers prefer to receive a gift card this holiday season, a 13% increase from last year. I don't know, 99% of people enjoy getting gift cards, so I guess that's what the kids are getting this year. I don't know. Mary Hines Drosch joins us here. She's head of product for the consumer business over there at the Bank of America. Gift cards? I mean, I like cash, quite frankly, but I mean, I'm a Wall Street person. But talk to us about the gift cards. Mary, what are you seeing in some of your survey work here as you talk to your card customers?
Yeah, everyone loves a gift card.
Everybody loves a gift card.
It's easy to buy, and everyone wants to receive it because of the flexibility, that you don't have to worry about what size they are, exactly what color they want, and it gives them that. I mean, obviously, cash is preferred by some of the older generation.
Thank you.
But that is often feels less personal than a gift card.
Yep.
And in addition to the fact that 75% want to receive it, they're also okay if you give them a physical gift, but they like the flexibility of the gift cards.
Tell us a bit about the survey and sort of how you conducted it, and maybe kind of situate this. Is this a new trend? Is this something that we've seen kind of building over the last few years?
It's continued to grow, and now you can find gift cards everywhere. And those who wait till the last minute for shopping, it's a great, easy way to get something. You put it in a card. But last year, the survey, it was 62% said that they prefer to receive a gift card. Now it's 75%. So you're going to increasingly see that trend. And there's also the digitization of gift cards. So it's easy. You can put them in your Apple Wallet as an example so that you don't have to worry about losing them. I mean, we also, in addition to understanding preferences, we wanted to know when people use them. And the majority of people use them before Valentine's Day. So they're a great way. You take advantage of those post-holiday sales.
Are there differences in quality? Are some cards better than others? Because now they're available just everywhere, and I'm not sure I'm just not sure if some are better than the others, or
yeah, well, you want an actual gift card, but gift cards don't expire, so you don't have to worry about not having the ability to use it, where sometimes prepaid cards do expire, so always make sure that you have that flexibility. But they're generally a nominal value that you can use to make a purchase, so it's no different than cash.
Okay.
The only restriction is if it's an Amazon gift card, you have to use it at Amazon, or a dining gift card. So sometimes you might get one for a place you've never gone before.
Okay. Well, a shout out to the Sweeney offspring. No Starbucks gift cards.
You don't want to name.
I don't go to Starbucks anymore.
But if you get it, what's great is you can regift it.
Oh, that's
there
true.
You go.
Give it back to them.
Gifting. But
Now
you
we're
can't
talking.
lose it. That's the thing. I've
Yes.
lost gift cards before and I've gotten them.
Could you kind of situate, like, I'm just curious as we look to the holiday seasons, or how the consumers are feeling about the holidays and their economic prospects. We were talking in the last segment just about how the consumer is under, so it seems a bit more pressure than they had been before, relying on their credit cards more, et cetera. How are people feeling going into the holiday season?
Well, we did some research to understand how much they were going to spend during this holiday season, and it's on average $2,100, which is up 7% versus last year. We also asked how they were feeling about the economic environment, and 62% are feeling financial strain in anticipation of making their holiday purchases, which seems high, but that's down from 67% last year. And so the consumer is feeling a bit better, but still having those impacts from inflation. They're using things like discount stores and warehouses as a way to really make the most of their money during the holiday season.
Do people set spending limits for the holidays? Do they say, I'm going to budget, X number of dollars to spend for the holidays and then try to stick to it? Do people do that?
Yeah, well, if they're responsible,
They're
they
responsible.
do.
Okay. Asking for a friend.
Yeah, we recommend that you set a budget for the holiday season and incorporate everything. So it's just not about gift giving. It's about wrapping paper, Scotch tape, about the food that you buy. A lot of those things really add up, and you need to stick to it. And that's where things like taking advantage of Cyber Monday and Black Friday are great ways to make the most of your money. But it's hard. I mean, you're going to likely save less during the holiday seasons than you do the rest of the year.
Talk to me about timing. We're talking to you here in October. Survey was done before that, obviously. We had Prime Days too. Are people buying more in advance? What is the timetable for holiday shopping? How much has it changed or shifted?
People are really getting ahead of the holiday shopping. 49% of those that we surveyed said that they would have already started by the time we hit Black Friday. And some as early as October. Prime Day, October 8th and 9th, we saw a spike in our spend data on those days. Really take advantage of those deals. Now, there's always a procrastinators. 8% of those that we surveyed said they wait until late December to start shopping. That's where the gift cards are really helpful because you can always stick something in an envelope. But more and more, and it really started post-pandemic with the supply chain challenges. People knew they needed to get ahead of it. Not really the case now, but people like to make sure that they stick to their budget, and by planning early, it's easier to do that.
Black Friday, Cyber Monday, are they still a thing?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Our biggest, when you look at Bank of America credit card customers' spend data, our number one day is Black Friday.
Okay.
And the at number 2 and number 3 days are the Friday and Saturday before Christmas, which is really the 8% who waits till the last minute.
Do we have a sense of what incentives work the best to get people to spend? So we talked about Prime Day, we talked about Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Beyond that, are there things that particularly these bigger stores, these warehouse stores are doing to get people to, yes, think about buying presents early, or just getting them into the stores or getting them online to shop?
Yeah, this trend with Prime Day, and Walmart has their own day. Even at Bank of America, we have more Rewards Day where we give an additional 2% back to our clients on November 7th. It's a way, when you have a limited time offer, to get people to make the decision to spend. And often if it's, they have a good deal, there's nothing that's really making you go into the store or online to make that purchase. So these limited time offers are really compelling. Also, there'll be some really big items that are extraordinarily discounted. That's really the Black Friday, Cyber Monday phenomenon. So people want to get there, get early, whether when the website sale starts or in the actual store, to take advantage of it. Now, those aren't wildly available, so the early bird certainly gets the worm in that case, but it then drives a big halo on other purchases.
There doesn't seem to be a must gift this year, is there? Like some years there is. I haven't heard anything. Are you guys seeing anything in the survey?
Yeah, I mean, it's
electronics, I guess, is a broad category, is always a good one.
Well, experiences continue to be the priority with the consumer. When we look at our overall spend data, we still see electronics down year over year.
Really?
And where we see the lift is with travel and entertainment. And so that's where buying a concert ticket or a night at a hotel and things like that, those seem to be more coveted by consumers right now than the latest iPad.
We just got a couple of tickets to see Tony Danza at the Carlisle.
Wow. Oh, yes. I live right near the Carlisle.
You're going to do that?
I'm going to do that. And it not cheap, by the way.
And Rita Wilson is playing there, too.
Is that right? All right. I used to go there all the time back in the day. But
by Bemelman's, across the way. Wow.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. Mary Heinz-Stroch, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming into our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Mary Heinz-Stroch, she is the head for product for the consumer business and wealth management banking and lending at the Bank of America. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. A final week of campaigning in the race for the White House following Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden last night. The former president once again claiming that he can end wars overseas.
Kamala Harris is a train wreck who has destroyed everything in her path. To make her president would be a gamble with the lives of millions and millions of people. She would get us into World War III. We're very close to World War III.
Awkward moments at the Trump campaign rally Sunday at Madison Square Garden. Some in the audience groaned when comedian Tony Hinchcliffe opened up the rally, telling jokes about Latino and black voters.
There's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
The Trump campaign is distancing itself from Hinchcliffe, saying that the joke does not reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris made a pitch to the people of Puerto Rico to give her their vote. In an announcement made on social media platform X, Harris pledged a new opportunity to task force for Puerto Rico to rebuild and modernize the energy grid. Harris also slammed former President Trump for how he handled Hurricane Maria in 2017. The World Series is in New York tonight with the Los Angeles Dodgers playing one of their star players, Shohei Ohtani, and he's cleared to play after injuring his left shoulder against the Yankees on Saturday. And for our listeners on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, you can hear tonight's Monday Night Football game as the New York Giants travel to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. Live on Bloomberg 1130, pregame coverage starts at 6:30. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Now, David, are you going to stay up for the World Series?
Well, Tom is back tomorrow, which liberates me greatly. So I might stay up later than I would have otherwise. I assume Tom is back tomorrow. But, I'll try to watch it. I mean, Game
I mean,
free.
I think Yankee
It's in
Stadium.
New York. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, it looked great. I mean, the games looked great at Dodger Stadium, but I think they'll also look just awesome with the bunting and all that kind
Weather
of stuff.
looks good.
Weather looks
Beautiful
good.
weekend here.
Yeah, we haven't had a drop of rain. That's a problem. I was actually down a little bit in South Jersey, down Long Beach Island way over the weekend, and down there around the Pine Barrens, signs everywhere about the forest fire risk.
Drought, yeah.
Really high. So we haven't had rain. I can't remember when. So that's bad for the forest fire.
The New Jersey Devil lives in the Pine Barrens.
Exactly, he does.
Purportedly.
Exactly.
I've not seen him, but
exactly. But so it should be good at the stadium tonight for the Yanks, and it's certainly good for Fox, having New York and LA, the two biggest TV markets, media markets in the country, both involved.
Were you convinced on the gift card thing? No.
Yeah, I've
hard to wear you down on that, I think.
Yeah,
but.
I mean, again, I'll throw a couple of shekels in each kid's stocking, and now we'll call it even there.
I thought they did expire, so that brought some comfort to me because I feel like I've gotten screwed over in the past, like getting one and losing it, as Lisa said, or just like not finding it till like a year and a half later, and then it's worthless.
Exactly, but I mean, I probably have a dozen Starbucks cards lying around that I'm like, I'm not.
It's a lot of ventis. Yeah.
I'll take them.
I'll give them.
I'll regift them to me.
That was the headline. The regifting opportunity is a good one.
A lot of Starbucks cards in the Mateo household this Christmas season. Looking at the markets here, we've got them open. We are cash open, 28 points higher on the S&P 500. That's half of 1%. The Dow's up 335 points. That's about 0.8%. The Nasdaq's up 100 points. That's half of 1%. The Russell, the small cappers, putting in the performance here of 1.3%. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks on the rise at the start of the busiest week for corporate earnings, including Apple, Microsoft, and Meta Platforms, among the many. We'll head over to the bond market right now. The 2-year yield, 4.10%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.24%, and that is little change. So we have the Nasdaq up 0.5%, 108 points. The Dow up 0.7%, 299 points, and the S&P 500 up 0.4%, or 26 points. Have to go to commodities. Brent crude down 5% at around $71 a barrel. WTI crude falling at $67 a barrel. Now, there's two sides to this story. You have oil companies losing ground. Crude prices slide. You have ExxonMobil right now. They are down more than 1%. And then you have Occidental Petroleum. They're down more than 1% as well. Then on the flip side, you have airlines. They're gaining on the impact of jet fuel costs. United Airlines, they're up about more than 2.5%. And we have Delta Airlines up 3%. And Volkswagen shares, well, they're down 1% in Germany, plans to close at least 3 factories there in order to cut costs. And since we're talking cars, a new study from CarEdge, it shows that roughly a third of people who finance cars, well, they owe more than their vehicles are worth. And that's putting more car owners at a loss when they try and trade it in, or eventually if their car is totaled in an accident, they are at a loss. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
Hi, Lisa Mateo. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene here
Can you finance
today.
a Vespa?
What's that?
Can you finance the Vespa?
Yes, but I did not.
Bought it outright.
But you know who provides the insurance for these things? Progressive.
Aha.
Like twice as good as my.
Very good.
I'm like, I have another carrier for everything else. I'm like a double, triple platinum customer of this carrier.
Yeah.
Nothing
No,
on the Vespa.
Progressive.
Yeah, so Progressive
All
is the
right.
way to go. So I'm all set to go there. Don't worry about me. I wear my helmet.
I'm glad to hear
I got
that.
my
Good.
full insurance, all that kind of good stuff. As opposed to the kids who ride around on these
the
electric
e-bikes,
bikes.
yes.
They're just
No,
flying
it's
up
at
and
their
down
own
the street.
peril.
Yeah,
And
no
mine,
helmets,
too,
nothing.
but-
All right, let's talk about this election. The polls, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of polls, but apparently they were pretty accurate last time. I don't know. Gautam Mukunda joins us here. He's a lecturer of management practice at the Yale School of Management. Gautam, talk to us about the polls here. The polls are showing this is about as tight as it could be for a presidential election race. A, do you believe those polls, and should we be believing these polls?
So I have no reason not to believe the polls.
Okay.
They're the data we've got. What I would say is polling is not designed to give us the answer that we are looking for, which is who is going to win. It can't. For a poll this tight, for a race that looks as tight as this is, it is simply unable to do that. There are a bunch of different reasons, but maybe the most important one is because the response rate for polling is so low. I mean, under 1 in 100 at this point for telephone polling. We have to construct what are called turnout models, right? So we have to sort of assume, like, okay, this is what the demographics of the election are going to look like, and based on that, we kind of mathematically reconstruct what that's going to be. But of course, that means all the hard work is in the assumptions, right? And so, are these accurate? I don't know. You don't know. No one will know. I'll tell you in 8 days. Well, 9 days probably. And that is a profound problem when we're all obsessively focused on the polls and trying to divine what's going to happen next. There's been very little movement. The top line, I would say, is just this is a really static election since the debate, basically. Harris gained about a point in the debate, and that's been about where we are. I said this last time I was here. I'll say it again. My gut instinct is that it will not be as close as we think. If there are errors, and there is always an error, right? Like just like the market goes up and down every day, polling's going to be off by a little bit. If there is an error, it will likely correlate across all of the swing states, and somebody will win more than one of them, and this will not be that tight in the Electoral College, whatever it is, and the actual number of votes.
My inbox fills up daily with the latest updates on early voting in Pennsylvania or Georgia or wherever, North Carolina, and we see records in a lot of those states. What can you divine from those numbers? There has been such a push in this election year, not just by Democrats, but by Republicans as well, to get people to vote early. Does that tell you anything, maybe not about the outcome, but sort of the direction of the election?
I divine that you should delete those emails.
All right, very good.
How about the turnout? What do we do with turnout? People are telling us that turnout is really key here. Is there any way to forecast turnout?
Sure, but it's again the same problem.
Okay.
I can forecast within a fairly broad range of turnout, and I'll tell you it's probably going to be pretty high because enthusiasm seems high on both sides, and people are energized and people are paying attention. But now we're talking about 0.5% is swinging. Well, I can't forecast that. No one can.
I'm curious, sort of, as you listen to the closing arguments so much as that's what they're articulating in these last few days, what you take away from that. So we had this big event in New York last night, which I think was maybe styled as a closing argument or a vanity project for the former president here in New York. And you had Kamala Harris, traveling to Texas and then to Philadelphia yesterday. We're trying to, again, give us that. But we'll get this kind of marquee closing argument, I guess, when she gives her speech on the ellipse in Washington, D.C. What are you hearing there? And do you think that works in this day and age, to have a kind of big marquee moment where the candidates before the election day articulate it in that way, in kind of a big speech?
So I don't think the big marquee moment itself matters so much as it's a coordinating function. It gets everybody in the campaign to understand this is what we're going to say for the last few days, and that can matter. I'll particularly point to 2016, where essentially Trump won in 2016 because all of the undecideds broke his way, almost certainly because of Comey's announcement. So it can matter, although there are fewer undecideds this time around. The closing arguments, this is historically unprecedented. I know we say that every day with Donald Trump. So, but this really is the two campaigns have the same closing argument. The Harris campaign's closing argument is that Donald Trump is an authoritarian who will imprison his enemies. And judging by the Madison Square Garden event yesterday, the Trump campaign's closing argument is that Donald Trump's an authoritarian who will imprison his enemies. I'm not sure why they picked that as their closing argument, and it's not their ads that they're running, but this is the message that the former president is sending over and over again when he talks about the enemy within, when he talks about going after his, like he's called for military tribunals for some of his enemies. In a normal era, I would say, well, that's a political death sentence. Obviously, nothing about Donald Trump is normal, but I'll also think that we're not thinking enough about the larger structural issue here. Since COVID and the inflation that followed COVID, every democratic first world government that has run for re-election has been blown out. Not come close, not scrape by, blown out. When Justin Trudeau runs for re-election in Canada, he's not going to win, and it's not going to be close. I think he's currently polling around 27%. Set in that context, Harris is actually outperforming the fundamentals by a pretty fair margin. It's actually, if we're not that different from the United Kingdom, we're not that different from Canada, it's actually surprising, given that context, that we are in a dead even election. And that says something about the fact that I think people are not finding this sort of Trump approach of, I'm going to go after my enemies, appealing. You have John Kelly coming out as a 4-star general, whose son died in Iraq. There's a lot of things that give him credibility to say this. And the Republican response, Marco Rubio said, on TV yesterday, he said, well, John Kelly's just lying. And you sort of, even when he said it, you're watching the interview, you don't believe that, right? You may not want to believe that he's telling the truth. You may not think that what he's saying is not important. Maybe you think that it's all Trump talk, all those things. But you don't believe he's lying. Nobody believes that he's lying.
If former President Trump wins again, do we have any sense of what his policy priorities are going to be, other than, I guess, maybe some of the stuff we heard at the Madison Square Garden yesterday, which was a little light on policy, I thought?
A little bit. So the tariffs seem to be pretty core to what he wants to do, and he has, as the executive, a fair amount of authority to do that. You have this sort of random grab bag of tax cuts. Apparently, a few days ago, he said that he was thinking about just ending all taxes, which,
tariffs will cover it.
Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah.
But that, when Republicans get a trifecta, they cut taxes. So there's going to be something, right? How those will look, I don't think anyone really knows. But my guess is, if he wins again, that we're talking about court politics, right? It's not traditional democratic politics because it's so personalized and it's so dependent on the whims of a single person. This really is like Byzantine court politics. We should all go back and read histories of the Byzantine Empire if we want to understand what's happening. And my read from the outside in is that I think what we're starting to see is sort of a power struggle among his major backers for who's going to shape this administration. People sort of talk about, his major Silicon Valley sort of financial endorsers. But these people, they might all be from the Valley, but that is basically the only thing they have in common. They are not aligned. Right. Between Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Mark Andreessen, these are three radically different views of what they want the government to do. And it wouldn't shock me if the course of the administration is basically determined by the struggle amongst those competing blocs for the favor of the president. Who's going to win that? My money would probably be on Peter Thiel, but I don't think anyone can say that in advance.
Yep, interesting. Well, it's going to be a fascinating time period, that's for sure. And unprecedented. Gautam Mukunda, he's a lecturer of management practice at the Yale School of Management here as we try to handicap the remaining 8 days until the election, and then who knows how long after that it will take. Looking at the market here, we have green on the screen. S&P's up about 0.5%. Same for the NASDAQ. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.